Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order Jefferson Elementary School District Governing Board's special meeting, May 5th at 6:34 p.m. Superintendent Vidales, could I get members present, please?
Yes. Mrs. Brizuela,
Here.
Ms. Jordan,
Here.
Mr. Koo,
Here.
Ms. Liaina Anoa'i,
Here.
Ms. Manio,
Here, thank you so much. Do you mind also leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, Superintendent?
sure, I will gladly do so. Let me
Thank you.
get this started here. Did that not happen? Did I screen share? Is it working?
You see it?
The
Okay,
guidelines.
yeah, let me go back. All
There
right,
it is.
all right. If you would repeat after me or say the pledge with me, put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I
I
pledge
pledge
allegiance
allegiance
to the
to the
flag
flag
of the
of the
United
United
States
States of
of
America
America and to
and
the
to the
republic
republic for which it stands,
one
one nation,
nation, under
under
God,
God, indivisible,
indivisible, with
with
liberty
and
and justice for all.
all. I've never said it
Thank
so
you.
slowly in my life.
Low.
Yeah,
The-
I've tried doing it more rapidly and then I get jumbled because of the sound on the Zoom.
Thank
Okay.
you, Superintendent. On to governance team meeting guidelines. The governance team members will review the governance team meeting guidelines. Great, and we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a first and a second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. That was unanimous. Oh, sorry, that was unanimous. Thank you so much. And do we have anybody wishing to address the board?
We do not at this moment.
Okay, then we shall move on to item 7, our Equity Network study session. Thank you for the both of you, Ms. Deborah and Ms. Nicole, for joining us again this evening. We truly appreciate your time.
Thank you. And we're so glad to be back with you this evening. And can't even remember the last time, a month. So about a month ago, right? So I'm sure a lot has occurred in a month's time, but but the work continues to go, right? You still have to do everything. And so I'm glad that everyone is back and looks like you're ready to get back into this work. Although it never is set aside, remember, it just continues to be active. So we're pleased to be with you this evening, looking forward to our 3-hour session that will go fast again, but we're going to just go a little bit deeper and into the work. And so, Nicole, you want to say a few words before we really start diving deep into this?
Yeah, ditto to what Deborah said. We're excited tonight for sure. And I just want to acknowledge you for continuing to focus on the work. There's a lot going on. And I think I always get excited to work with boards who want to prioritize this work beyond just like that moment in time, because there's a lot of energy in the air around social justice and equity, but to really prioritize this work is so important. And based on what's happening at this moment where people are engaging more deeply, there's a lot of pushback right now. And so I think that it is important that boards have this sacred time to be able to really process, what does this mean for us, and what is our vision, what is our view collectively, so that it's very clear to all that are in the district and the community that this is our why to this work. So tonight is really important. I think in this journey, we'll definitely, as Deborah and I always remind you, this is your professional learning space. So we definitely want to be open to whatever questions you have and any I think just clarifying moments that you have in the work we share today, just this is your PD time. This is a sacred time. It's no governance, no business today. It's more about literally just learning together. And so I'm excited about that. And so today, the way we're going to do this, Deborah and I always kind of co-facilitate in the work. So Deborah's going to kick us off today and get us rolling through our first part of our agenda. And then I'll join in after we take a little break, give you all a brain break, a water break, bio break. And then I'll kind of dive into the work with you and kind of follow up when we started our work around the equity statement work, and really just keeping moving you forward on your journey as a governance team. So Deborah, I'll have you take the virtual mic and I'll jump in if anyone has questions, but Deborah's going to lead us through the first piece, and then I'll jump in when we get ready to do our equity statement work.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you, Nicole. And again, this is our time. And so anytime there's a slide deck up, just say, hey, I got a question, because I may not be able to see everyone. Very informal. We're going to spend more time talking through like your reading assignments, which I know all of you guys read your article. You guys seem to do your homework extremely well. So I don't have to worry about that, but we're going to have some conversations about that as well. And any questions, when you see some of the slide deck, I will go through quick because we kind of went through it. But if it triggers you to ask questions, please feel free to do that as well. Okay, we're good. I see the heads nodding. Okay. Let me get my screen up for you. Okay, and everybody can see that screen deck, right? There we go. So, of course, we're always going to start out with our agreements. Anytime you have conversations about equity, about race, anything that's a little bit challenging, always just keep centered around these four agreements. This is also very helpful when you are going to be engaging your community or just other groups of individuals. Just keep these four agreements in mind when you're engaging. So again, staying fully engaged, just kind of sit in that space where we can, connect to the dialogue that we're going to be having. We have distractions around us, but we're going to kind of stay engaged in this work so that we can continue to move forward. And of course, in doing this work, which we shared last month, of course, there's always some discomfort, but discomfort is not always a negative thing. It seems like it would be, but it is, that's where the growth happens, where we're uncomfortable. So no one really should say they're comfortable in talking about equity, race, or anything like that. There should be some discomfort, so that is okay. We'll just find a space to be able to listen to the dialogue that's going on and listen for understanding, most importantly. And speaking our truth. We don't just tell people what we want them to hear. We actually speak and be open to listening to our colleagues here on where they are. Remember, I believe I shared last time, when we say meet people where they are, we have to be prepared when they show you where they are, but you want to continue the dialogue. And of course, always expect and accept non-closure. This work is a marathon. It is going to take a while. It takes time to turn the Titanic, if you will. But as long as there's some ripples in the water, you're doing some work. And so this is just the 2 of 4 times that we're going to be together. And so there's a lot more opportunities we'll give you to have conversations. But even at the 4th one, there still will be some non-closure. But that's okay, because that means there's a lot of work to get done. And so just kind of think about, if you had to select one, which one would resonate the most with you that you're going to really focus on. And then identify when we're having the conversation, we move between these 4, and that is okay. But it's always, this is the space that we're creating for you. Safe space, we now say brave space, because not everyone always feels safe, but brave space, you really can share your thoughts and your views, because this is all about what's best for the district. And so that's the conversation that we will have. Everyone's good with the agreements? We're good?
Yeah.
All right. So let's just remember the work, centering our work. Again, the why, when we look at this golden circle, and the connection on the why is your equity statement, your core values, your shared beliefs, the purpose of this work. It's so important to really focus on that is the work we're going to do. Your equity statement, which is going to guide the work for your equity policy. The how, of course, your norms, your board, I call it, of course, the protocols, your roles, your operating procedures, how you're going to engage with each other. That how is so important about the very specific actions taken to realize the why. And the what, of course, is the big picture of the what, that equity policy and your priorities. There are so many buckets, if you will, of work that the board can focus on, but prioritizing the work is so important, and identifying that, yes, there will be hot topics, but not to mix those. They are hot. You have your hot topics and you have your priorities. And we have to learn to kind of push those hot topics to the superintendent, and his staff can handle all of those things, but you're aware of them. But you want to stay focused on the priorities that you have. And of course, your equity impact statement is really going to show keep track of all the work that you're doing in this on this equity journey. Any comments about questions about centering your work on this equity driven work? All of this is connected, is interwoven with each other. Good. And just an overview quickly of the equity in education. We talked about what equity means. In the far left column, understanding what it is and what it's not is so important. It's not equality. And that student success is demonstrated in so many different ways, different diverse ways. But the key thing too, are work, focusing on the challenges for equity. There will be challenges when the work is pushed out to do it, because yes, you have the historical inequities. There will always be resistance to change. And sometimes that is because a lack of understanding of the work that the board is wanting the staff to do. And so we have to remember where everyone is, and they have to understand where do they fit in doing this work. So that's where you can have some resistance, but the superintendent working with his staff can really figure out what the staff needs to get a better understanding. So it's not as much resistance, but there will just be some resistance because there's no buy-in, and you will have to kind of work through that as well. And of course, dealing with the biases, institutional racism, you will have to just dissect all of that. These are the real things that are happening in the district that impact this work that you're going to do. Okay. And the key thing, which is connected to the governance work, of course, you are policy driven, of course, and remember to changing your policies and your practices, making sure when you really focus on what your priorities are going to be, what policies or practices do you have in place that you may have to adjust? And of course, the resources that are connected, this is all in the purview of the governance work. Again, being good stewards of the budget, not only money, it's also about human capital, in which you will engage your superintendent. Because when you have your not your strategic plan, but your equity policy, and it's determining who's going to do what, the key question you will be asking, do we have the capacity to do this work as well, which can human capital and financial. Building positive relationships. I will always stress in doing this work and just doing your governance work, building relationships not only amongst your stakeholders, but with the board team as well and your superintendent, so that the staff sees that the board the governance team with your superintendent, that you are modeling what you expect them to do as well. So that is so important. And of course, empowering those marginalized stakeholders who you don't hear from. And so are you able to even identify, are there some stakeholders that you always hear from who come to your board meetings or you get messages from? Would you guys say that you have, every district usually have groups. So what about those that you don't hear from? Are you able to identify stakeholders that you are not engaged with as well? Do you know who those stakeholders are? What do you think? Are you able to articulate who those groups are and how to reach out to them? Anybody can jump in.
Mhm.
I'm gonna call
there's
somebody's name because this
there's
is
there's numerous groups that I mean that I think many of us know, and some of us share circles, but that they tap into us because again that comfort level and that level of trust
Mhm.
to facilitate the conversation. But I most definitely the answer to that is yes. Most definitely there are tons of various groups that we don't tap into formally. But I believe that there are some informal conversations happening. But I think the equity piece of this is how can we formalize those conversations and strengthen them. So I look forward to learning some of that, gaining some of those tools to empower those families to feel comfortable to come forward to use their own voices instead of speaking through us.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Absolutely. Because you know, that's some beginning work that you have to start thinking about. Who are those groups that we don't engage with? And then what is going to be our strategy? Do we provide a welcoming environment for them to come to us? Or do we need, if there are events going on, do we go to where they are so that they know who we are? Because we don't want to assume that everyone knows the Board of Education, but you know, you are part of the community. So so there are different ways to engage, building those relationships so that when you are pushing out this equity work, they have a better understanding and they will be your allies instead of push back. So that's why it's so important to think about any opportunities that are currently happening in your community that once people are starting to do face-to-face events, that there's a presence there. That helps build relationships as well. And of course, shifting that mental model. We all have to practice this and be intentional about doing things different because you committed to doing this equity work. And so now with everything you do is through the lens of equity. And so helping frame it where superintendent and his staff will also be focusing on how do we do things different? How do we have our shared common beliefs about what students can do and shifting what we've always done, how we used to think about educating children. But this, of course, as you know, is a heavy lift and it takes time to do this. Definitely, but it has to be intentional and discussing it freely. Superintendent, what are your thoughts about the work that you're going to have to do with your staff and just in this shifting the mental models, because it's connected with the actions that the board is going to focus on? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think with many school districts, the mental model is the last part to shift. I think people start to shift their language and maybe they start to shift their practice, but how they think about the situation and then what they believe about the situation comes last. And so it's big work. I was reflecting as I read that article about, we'll probably get to it later, the school to prison pipeline. And when I first used that term 6 or 8 years ago, there was a severe backlash because some staff unwilling to see their actions contributing to an eventual, life of, criminality leading to prison, And I tried to explain, we keep excluding students from our classrooms over and over. They don't feel a part of our community. They're not going to want to contribute and be a part of it. And so the only choice left is to be anti. And eventually they get somebody, led into more criminal behavior and eventually prison. So that was a hard conversation that we had. And I realized then that not everybody shared my perspective around the importance of helping students feel included and part of our classroom communities.
Absolutely. And you said that was 5 or 6 years ago you had that conversation.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
know, unfortunately, what it did, it quieted me down. I mean, I paused on that message for a little bit, and I figured out different ways to bring it about later. But it does have a dampening effect, you know, just the voices of a few.
Right.
I don't know
right.
why. I don't know why we let that happen, but it happened. So
Right. But of course, as you're doing this equity work, that it, like you said, even in the article, that is a part of this conversation too. And the way I like to, when board members, when you are, engaged with conversations about that, what does that mean to you as a governing body and the decisions that you're making? But you have to think about when you're asking for data. So if someone is saying, we have an issue of, school to prison pipeline because of what's happening, this is all what's going to happen. Well, how do you know that? Well, you start thinking about your data, and you know that the connection to that statement is also connected to third grade literacy. Okay, so you have to think about that. That yes, they do determine how many beds are going to be for prisoners based upon they check with the education system third grade literacy, and you don't hear about prisons closing because there are no prisoners, right? But you hear about schools closing because no children. So again, thinking that is a pathway, but you don't want it to happen in your district. So what are you doing? Focusing on your elementary so that you're capturing these students right now. But to know where you are, you have to find out what is your data. Third grade literacy for boys or for girls, whatever you want, whatever subgroup you want, to see how, where you are. Because yes, they do check with education, public schools to see, well, because it's for profit, building a prison is for profit. And that is just really shameful that they are building that based upon anticipating that our children are going to fail. And so with even just thinking about that, that would really encourage everyone to want to do what else do we need to do to focus on giving them the best start? We have been talking about 0 to 3 for 20, 30 years, and why we haven't figured out what to do by now, I don't know. But of course, we don't want to give up on our kids. But just that's how it's connected to your decision and the data that you have. How do you know that you are not perpetuating that as well? So when you're talking about equity, you want to think about questions like that of your superintendent. Help us understand what's going on there. Do we need to put more resources in shoring up the literacy? So those are the type of conversations that you can have that will connect just to that statement. So have you had those conversations, or you realize that that's coming if you haven't, right? Yes. Okay, I'm going to jump back in here and whoops. Just always, I like to see faces when I'm talking, so you have to forgive me. I like to look at people when I'm talking. And so, we went over the public education and we went, and hopefully, you guys have the link and you still have access to it. That I don't know if you've had a chance to really go in and look at each section and see, basically it's about repeating history. There are some things that are starting to happen again. And we know that it's a public education system that wasn't created for our students. So why are we trying to use the same system to close the gaps? And so I always will pose a question to boards and superintendent, then until it's changed legislatively, and we know that is at a snail's pace. What are you doing in your district where you can just say for the curriculum, if we know that the books that these publishing companies sold us is not all of our history, how, and this is for the superintendent, how creative are you allowing your staff to be to educate all of the children, to give them all history? Until the right books are published, but we have the internet, so there's access. But how much leeway are you giving them to ensure that your students are being educated for the entire history? not subgroups only of history. So, there's just something to think about, but those are all types of questions that I pose that boards can ask of the superintendent without dictating, of course, what curriculum to purchase or something like that. But you still would like to know what's the plan, in order to do that. So did anyone have a chance to really go a little bit deeper into this timeline? If you have any comments about it and seeing how it is connected to this work you're going to do, did anyone have a chance to look at it a little deeper?
I was going to say, I recall this was from the first Equity Network session we had last year. I realized this was a presentation that was presented and talked about how pretty much public education in the United States has a history of systemic racism is the right word. Talk about how there's been different instances, events, and all these kind of events not even that long ago that actually have had a huge impact on education today. It's sort of kind of defined how kids learn, but sort of laying the framework of how we can actually learn from all those past mistakes and actually do something about all that.
Right. Thank you. You are spot on. Absolutely. Thank you, Clayton, for sharing that. Anyone else want to make a comment? Did you have a chance to kind of look at it a little deeper? What were your thoughts?
And if you all
Don't be
like,
quiet.
I can share my timeline on my screen if you want as well. I know Marie was not with us in the first session, so I don't know, Marie, if you wanted us to share just briefly. We have some guiding questions that we want to follow up on, but do you all want me to share mine, or are you all good? I know it was in your folder too, but.
I'm a good listener, and I'll take some notes.
Right. Okay. And if you get a chance, Maria, yes, it is there, and it's, it definitely walks you through from 67, or I can't even read that. I don't have my glasses on, up until current, a few years ago. And it's just a pattern of, education was not even, it was started out for religious purposes. And
Right.
so, and as we know, we think about even the 180 days or 88 days, however many days, we wonder how are we going to be competitive globally when other kids are in school 200, 250 days, 300 days or whatever. But we are stuck in this agricultural type of system. And to me, I don't know, I don't understand why that's not, maybe it is being challenged, but I don't see anything happening because we still have the 180 or 88 days. And so to me, it seems that kids will be, the more they're in school, there's a higher probability that they will learn more. But we, take the summer off. I always felt that 3 months out of school was just too much. Even as a child, I was ready to go back to school after a month.
Mhm.
And so, but I don't know when that will ever change, if we will ever see that as well. And so, Marie, I want to look at this. These are the guiding questions that will support this timeline that really shows even the testing that we did, some comments from the presidents on, not valuing, thinking that immigrants were feeble-minded, and just the mentality of individuals who created this history, on how, just the mindset, not thinking very highly of our students. And so when you think about the history of public education, the historical purpose of it was not to educate our children, right? And so what is the impact of the current landscape of public education and your community? But the key thing I really want you to focus in on, keeping in mind of the history that it was not designed for our students, and the fight just in public education, not funding it. We have charter schools, we have private schools, and just the fight to educate children. It should just be the focus on educating all children, no matter what. But how do you think the governance team perpetuates inequities? When you think about this, the guideline, the timeline of education, governance teams, you're making decisions about educating your students. What comes to mind? What are you thinking about? How would the governance team perpetuate inequities in your district? What would you say?
So, well, I personally believe that every child can learn, no matter what. There's no such thing as someone can't. But there are times when people hold them back and push them or put them into a situation where they think they're not, quote, smart enough. And it's not about that. It's probably important for governance teams to realize that all children are different and come from different places. Some don't have families that can help them with their work. And that's not because they won't help them, it's because they don't have the education to help them. Some come from families that don't speak English. While they may learn English, the children in school, they're not really learning it in the way the parents understand it. I taught English for a second language for adults for several years, a long time. And it was kind of sad when they would come. They want to come so they can learn something, but at the same time, they're afraid. They're afraid to speak. They're afraid. And I made it a point to make every single student of mine to go up to the board, even if I had to whisper to them what to write. Give them that feeling of being able to accomplish. And I think we need to really look at that more. And I know teachers have a hard time. It's a good thing they don't have the size classrooms they had years ago, because the classes are smaller. Thank goodness. And we made sure we made that happen as a school. But I keep saying we. I've been on the school board, it'll be 40 years this year. So I've seen it go through all kinds of ups and downs and everything. And so we've come a long ways, but I think we need to do more. And now I think the thing is that if it's racial and it feels like, well, we can't teach this child because of their background or because of what race they belong to, that's wrong. That's wrong. Every child will learn as long as we give them tools with which to learn. And so I think everything has a place. It's like a big circle. Everything has a place to make that child complete. I'm not going to preach anymore. Anyway.
No. Thank you for sharing. You are spot on. Yeah. But having that mindset, yes, every child can learn. They just learn differently. And then, so what kind of barriers would be in place that will hinder them from learning? If we say we're going to even the playing field, to remove the barrier, removing the fence, when we're talking about giving kids the resources they need when they need it. First of all, you need to know what they need and then engage them at that level. And so your decision making at the board table, it definitely will impact if you don't, number one, have the mindset and thinking, yes, I do believe all of our children can learn. And yes, in this country today, yes, we are breaking things down into race, ethnicity. We are doing that. And so, but that doesn't mean that because whatever your pocket that, category that your students fall in, that there are some limitations. But we can say that, but what are some practices that could be in place that demonstrates it every day and the kids know it? So those are the things we have to be very careful of, how teachers engage with students who don't look like them or are having some challenges speaking English. Are they patient enough to listen and just pick up whatever they can? So there are so many things that as adults that we have to learn to do differently to really engage students. And so thank you, Marie, for sharing that and your experience. Go ahead, Andrea. Andrea or Andrea?
Andrea.
Andrea. Okay, good. I was actually on a call today with an Andrea. Well, I'm like, I don't know if her name was Andrea or Andrea. So I'm glad it's Andrea. I can remember that one. Thank you, Andrea. Yes. What would you like to share, Andrea?
I wanted to share what I had when I had reviewed the timeline and
Sure.
and what I felt about it. So in 1870, it mentions that California had devised the rule of 10, which basically was like empowering the separation of schools. And then in 1921, basically 100 years ago, they also did. I'm going to actually just read it. It basically says the governing body of a school district shall have the power to exclude children of filthy or vicious habits. And so this really stood out for me because I feel as though there's a lot of unconscious bias. Like people may not unconscious bias where they're not going to verbally say, you know, oh, though this kid is unteachable, or this kid is difficult, or, you know, this group of students, whether it because of their race or their financial status or because of their sexuality, are not good enough to be taught. And I think sometimes people perpetuate that within themselves. It's like, well, they feel a certain way, you know, they see a kid that's walking by maybe with their pants sagging, it's like, well, that's a bad kid. Well, why does someone's clothing then choose to determine how they can learn? Or, oh, that person doesn't speak English and we're in America, so you have to speak English. Well, why does that now preclude that person from being a student that can be taught? And so I just think there's a lot of things that even from 100 years ago still stand today. And I think a lot of times people are like, well, that's not happening because they're not experiencing it. But as an African-American myself, and as someone that actually joined the board because my child experienced racism in our school district, you know, for me, it's very real and it's very personal. And it's like, we can't just say what's needed to be said so that it looks good on paper. We truly need to take the action to move forward, or it's going to continue to be the same cycle. And 100 years from now, we're going to be having the same conversation.
Same conversation. Absolutely. Thank you. That was very rich discussion you had. Absolutely. That rule of 10. And in some ways, they're still doing that. Like you said, 100 years later, then what is it going to look like? Not even 100 years. What about 20 years from now? You know, if we don't stop this vicious cycle, we know, you know, with what we've experienced just over the last year, this was a boiling point. Everything was in that pressure cooker, you know, and it just took one thing and it just exploded, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle, if you will. It is out there. We are going to have to address it, whether people are comfortable or not. But how does this impact the work that you're doing? You have to be very aware and call it what it is. And again, we address issues and behaviors and practices, not attacking, of course, individuals. And no one wants to feel they're going to be penalized for perhaps doing something that they just didn't know, they just were doing it. But it has to be determined that this is just the way this district is going to operate. Processes and practices we are going to have to dismantle. We're not going to put Band-Aids on anything. We have to tear some things down and build differently if you want different outcomes for your students. So thank you so much for sharing that. Anyone else want to share your thoughts about that and thinking about how the governance team can perpetuate the inequities, and then how do you end it? Because you have to know how do you address these inequities, and what do you plan to do about it? I keep using the language dismantling. That is one way. You have to dismantle. But what are your thoughts?
I wanted to share something, Ms. Deborah.
Sure, please do.
So one of the things, to answer your question, that a board does to perpetuate the inequities is we're in charge of approving the curriculum for the students. And if we approve textbook vendors that are known for leaning, you know, one way or another, then that's how we're perpetuating it, by allowing that type of curriculum to continue in our schools. And I think the way that we've answered it specifically as this board is getting ahead of the state's ethnic studies curriculum and approving our own, which is actually even more inclusive than the state of California's. And as we are implementing, we actually also maybe haphazardly found out that some of our teachers don't have the cultural knowledge to to I guess teach in a more equitable way, and really understanding where our students are coming from, socioeconomic wise. They're a little bit removed, and I'm sure our teachers are less than a lot of our other neighboring districts like Millbrae or Atherton, but nonetheless it is there. And in our studies, to implement ethnic studies, that's where we learned that some of these teachers are like, I never even knew about this, that, or the other, when it comes to, some of the other ethnicities that we serve. Even in like one of the schools I just visited, our K-8 school, the vice principal said that their school was 80% Filipino, but he had no idea about the history of the Philippines and how we were colonized for 300 years by the Spanish, so on and so forth. So it's like there's an opportunity, there's a learning opportunity here for our staff and our teachers to understand the historical context where our students come from and meet them there. And so I think that another way, other than implementing the curriculum, but also developing our professionals to meet our students that way, so that not just the content, but the dissemination of the information is coming from an equitable space as well, or at least being conscientious of it.
Right. Thank you so much. You are spot on, because again, you have to remember, if you have teaching staff that's been there 20, 30 some years, they did not learn this. When I was in school, this education, all the things that students are getting today, I didn't learn that. I had to learn as an adult. I'm still learning, and I've been far removed from school for several decades, but you have to remember that's not what they were trained to do. So they probably are good at doing what they were trained to do. And yes, it's going to be a discomfort. And this is where you get the resistance, the pushback, because of lack of knowledge and not wanting it to seem that I intentionally did not teach all these students who came through, but I taught them what I knew. But now that the district is having a laser focus on equity, again, it's making sure that everyone sees where they fit in. And that, yes, if you don't know, it is okay to say that. You're not going to be penalized for that. So what can we give you to help you? Because this is the standard. This is where we want everyone to be. And so you're going to have people all over. You're going to have some high achievers, people who are ready to go. Then you think about, this is a superintendent can think about, how do I team these groups up? If you have some really superstars, that peer-to-peer, it is phenomenal. They would do so much more than if the superintendent tells them to do it. And so you utilize all of the areas that you can of individuals who are ready, those who are kind of ready but skeptical, and then some who just like, oh, I can't do this. And you may have people who just say, absolutely, I can't do this. So this is no longer a good place for me. And that's okay. Because if they don't feel that they can do this work, they have to have an option out without being pushed out. No one's being pushed out, but at least saying, I've been in the district 20, 30 years. It's probably time, because a lot of teachers are retiring. This has just been a year that people are just saying, I can't do this anymore. And that it has to be okay. And so you just make sure that, again, when you're looking at recruiting, you're not hiring the teachers or the principals, but understanding, superintendent, what's the plan to help diversify? Not only ethnicity, content-wise, everything, to make sure we have the right, a diverse group of staff teaching our children to be able to do this equity work. So that's a way that board members still engage below that dotted line that I shared with you before. So connecting all that is so important. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to jump in? Monica, you have anything? I would love to hear from you.
I was just feeling really heavy reading all of that.
Yeah.
It was heavy because, and I even got emotional reading all of that history, because it hits me that there's still a lot of things that haven't changed. And that was really heavy considering all that we've been experiencing these past few weeks more recently. And this vicious cycle, as you spoke to, the killings, literally to me, I consider those a level of lynching in public, you know, the hate that we're seeing so publicly. And then I read the history of education and the level of oppression that was very intentional to weed out who gets educated with quality and who doesn't. And I was like, we're still experiencing that, you know. And so when we speak to what a governance team does with addressing not being complacent, and funding things that need to be funded, I mean, everything that was said today, we can speak to developing and cultivating an equity statement, but the reality is that we have to be able to fund the things that we need to change.
Absolutely.
Because we can't just speak to them and put them out there in space. The reality is just like we did ethnic studies, how we said we were going to do this, and now we're talking to curriculum, now we're talking to textbooks. We need to like comb through that and be very focused and intentional. Like, we want this to be an inclusive, equitable approach. You tell us what textbooks, or you guide us through this. These textbooks should not be in the classroom, period. Then we don't just identify them, we raise awareness of the why, we remove them in a timely manner, and also explain the why and the importance of why that has to happen. And that's an education process, because we can't just do the action and not guide people through the process, because yes, we're going to get pushback. People are going to, we will have opposition no matter what we do. There's always someone on the other side. But it always has to be an educational process, because at the very least along the way, that's equity. Equity is teaching someone something they didn't know before. Didn't know before. And so it was heavy to read that. That's why I was hearing comments and I didn't want to comment, because it made me a little angry.
Yeah, I go through it very often. I have these it triggers. I get triggers from that. Absolutely.
Reading a whole bunch of things, because I could actually speak from an experience of some of those things that either I experienced personally, a family member experience, or someone I know, or even students that I've witnessed pre and during in and out of the district. And it just bothered me. And then it made me again challenge myself as a board member, like you're challenging us now. What can we do to end
We can do.
We can do it, but we recognize that we are through that snail process of, you know, it's just the system that we're in.
It is.
That I'd love to see change.
Absolutely.
But,
absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I think you are spot on, and the power that the board has. When you talked about the curriculum, you have all of these vendors who are trying to wine and dine you, if you will, and tell you I had this is the best book since French fries. Okay, the best thing for you. Now you're in a great position to say, okay, show us where it represents our student body. I'm hoping even through this last year that a lot of these public publishing companies have gone back to the drawing board, if you will, to put in, because there are two of them who actually admitted that they knew that they were putting information in there that was not always correct, but it was about its economics. Billions of dollars come through the school system on purchasing curriculum. And then that's what's being taught to our children. So it's the brainwashing type of thing. And so now we have to peel all of that back, but you have control over what vendor contracts. Do they support this equity work? So now you will start aligning everything you do. How does this support your equity journey? You know, whatever you purchase, who you engage with. Even when the superintendent has his staff doing professional development in equity. Okay, all of a sudden, if you guys don't realize it now, and it's not Nicole and I though, but all of a sudden, everyone's an expert in this. And so through COVID, everyone tried to recreate themselves. So they are going to be coming to your school system, telling you they have the best thing for your teachers and you just have to be leery of that. And I'm sure your superintendent will be watching, but the board is just going to make sure that there's funding there to support them, but make sure whatever professional learning they get, that it's aligned with what you're trying to do. So there are multiple things happening. That's how the board can really pay attention to. We don't want to perpetuate inequity, so we have to make sure that we are making our decisions through the lens of equity, comparing. Go back and look at some contracts. Some contracts are probably coming up for renewal. Some things may not need to be renewed, unless they have to shift. But that's the power of the governance team, to be able to stop the vicious cycle of people coming in, selling you something that going to your students that is not providing the best educational experience for them. All of that now, since you decided to go on this equity journey, will come to a complete halt. You will start just dissecting everything. And that's why it takes time to do this work. And it's so important. And I always remind board teams that, you're going on this journey. We'll talk about a journey, but there's no cul-de-sac on this. There's nowhere you can do a U-turn. You are on this journey. Sometimes you can slow down, which is fine, but you gather yourself and you just continue on. And that's why you're looking at all of the functions of the school system. The board needs to really be dissecting that, to make sure that if we're going to do this equity work, that we have to make sure that we're just not continuing to perpetuate the inequities that are happening. Superintendent, you have any thought? I kind of see the wheels going in your head there.
Yes, I do. That question of how does the board perpetuate inequities, and it just got me thinking. I don't know how often that's a conscious decision that the board takes to perpetuate an inequity. I think sometimes it's a factor of the system, and we have to open up school tomorrow. So we can't hold up something today, because if we hold up something today, we can't open up tomorrow. But, so much of what the board does, as you mentioned, approve contracts, and that's to keep the operations of the schools going. And sometimes we don't ask the questions about, equity in these situations. And to me, I feel like the system is designed to have very heavy momentum, like inertia, like it does not move easily, and right? It, like you mentioned, it's a tanker. It's moving at 100 miles an hour. There's no way you're going to shift that tanker easily, or stop it. If you want to put the brakes on it. And so the system is designed to perpetuate the system. And we talk about dismantling and redesigning, and all of those things are possible, but we need to be strategic as to how and when we do it. Otherwise, we end up with nothing, and we just crash into the wall, and we have nothing. And then those folks who are against this movement will come in and rebuild the system. After we've crashed it.
You're right.
And destroyed it. Which it needed to happen, but we didn't really do it strategically. So anyway, those are just my thoughts.
And that's why they have you, Superintendent, thinking strategically along with the board, because the board, you can kind of look at this work, though, as shoring up the foundation. It's going to take years before you really see the fruits of your labor, if you will. But the key thing is building that foundation so that if there is a change on the board or in your superintendency, that the foundation is sound enough so that it's just a matter of passing the torch and the work that just continue. But what happens often is that board, districts can just want to hurry up and say, we have an equity policy, check that box where we're done. And then it's okay, you have equity policy, but I don't see any evidence in it. I don't even see any evidence when I look at your board agenda that I would think that you are an equity focused district. I don't see any evidence when I see the principals or the teachers have their meetings that they're focusing on equity. And that's where the board has to make sure that it's filtered all the way down, that equity is the agenda. It's not just something that's on the agenda. But again, the heavy lift is shoring it up. And that means you're looking at every nook and cranny, every function, because there are no one gets a pass. I put it that way. No one gets a pass, either intentionally or not. But it needs to be very clear from the Board of Education on the expectations of moving the district forward, focusing on equity for all of your scholars. Because we know that we can't, look in that rearview mirror all the time when you're driving. Is that keeping your focus on, of course, on the windshield, but that rearview mirror is going to remind you of some casualties that you ran over, some bad behavior, some bad policies, bad practices. And so just making sure that every time you're meeting, even when you have study sessions, you want to be focusing on at least this portion of, just like I said, if you decide on what your priorities are, and we kind of went through that last time, start connecting that to your policies. And then that's when you can start dismantling a lot of this. So it is a heavy lift. It's a lot of work, but I know you're up to it. I'm keeping track of my time here, and I really want to get to that article, right? Talking about another article, something that should have been kind of tugging at you a little bit when you read the racial article. I'm not going to do that one. Let me do this. Make sure. So anytime you have any other comments, you can jump in there. But I, just wanted you to always connect these guiding questions, and always go back and look at that. And Maria, especially when you get a chance to look at the guideline for the history of public education. And let's see. Okay, let me see if I could do this. So I'm going to give you a chance to just look at this video, and then it's going to kind of prepare us to keep your mindset on thinking about really just what educational malpractice is. And that's exactly what I call it, when we don't focus on what's best for our students. We're spending a lot of time on what's best for adults. And so let me see. I want to make sure I could share this. And
I have it queued up, Deborah, if you want me to play. Yeah, I can cue mine on mine. Yeah. Sure.
Okay, and then we'll have a conversation about this. But just think about what we call a cap moment. What's confirming for you when you're watching this, and what other questions would you ask, and what provokes you? So just kind of think about what we call the cap moment. We'll just take a few minutes and watch this video. Oh, I got to stop sharing, right?
Yep.
There you go. There you go.
All right, let's see. All right. So just a little context too for the video. This is a setting, and some of you, I think, may or may not have seen this in our equity network, but the connection is really centered around this gentleman kind of calling us out as a school system, right? And he's kind of representing the people, and I often say, like, representing our students and voices who may have not been heard and have a perspective about what's not happening well. And then also gives perspective about what may work well. And so he's suing the school system is kind of the setting. And so I'll go ahead and play it and sit back and relax.
Albert Einstein once said, "Everybody's a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today on trial we have modern day schooling. Glad you could come. Not only does he make fish climb trees, but also makes them climb down and do a 10-mile run. Tell me, school, are you proud of the things you've done? Turning millions of people into robots, do you find that fun? Do you realize how many kids relate to that fish? Swimming upstream in class, never finding their gifts, thinking they are stupid, believing they are useless? Well, the time has come, no more excuses. I call school to the stand and accuse him of killing creativity, individuality, and being intellectually abusive. He's an ancient institution that has outlived his usage. So, Your Honor, this concludes my opening statement, and if I may present the evidence of my case, I will prove it.
Proceed.
Exhibit A, here's a modern day phone. Recognize it? Here's a phone from 150 years ago. Big difference, right? Stay with me. Here's a car from today, and here's a car from 150 years ago. Big difference, right? Well, get this. Here's a classroom of today, and here's a class we used 150 years ago. Now, ain't that a shame? In literally more than a century, nothing has changed. Yet you claim to prepare students for the future? But with evidence like that, I must ask, do you prepare students for the future or the past? I did a background check on you and let the record show that you were made to train people to work in factories, which explains why you put students in straight rows, nice and neat, tell them sit still, raise your hand if you want to speak, give them a short break to eat, and for 8 hours a day, tell them what to think. Oh, and make them compete to get an A letter which determines product quality, hence grade A of meat. I get it. Back then, times were different. We all have a past. I myself am no Gandhi. But today, we don't need to make robot zombies. The world has progressed. And now we need people who think creatively, innovatively, critically, independently, with the ability to connect. See, every scientist will tell you that no two brains are the same. And every parent with 2 or more children will confirm that claim. So please explain why you treat students like cookie cutter frames or snapback hats, giving them this one-size-fits-all crap.
Watch your language.
Sorry, Your Honor, but if a doctor prescribed the exact same medicine to all of his patients, the results will be tragic. So many people would get sick, yet when it comes to school, this is exactly what happens, this educational malpractice, where one teacher stands in front of 20 kids, each one having different strengths, different needs, different gifts, different dreams, and you teach the same thing the same way? That's horrific. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant should not be acquitted. This may be one of the worst criminal offenses ever to be committed. And let's mention the way you treat your employees.
Objection. Overruled. I want to hear this.
It's a shame. I mean, teachers have the most important job on the planet, yet they're underpaid? No wonder so many students are short-changed. Let's be honest, teachers should earn just as much as doctors, because a doctor can do heart surgery and save the life of a kid, but a great teacher can reach the heart of that kid and allow him to truly live. See, teachers are heroes that often get blamed, but they're not the problem. They work in a system without many options or rights. Curriculums are created by policymakers, most of which have never taught a day in their life. Just obsessed with standardized tests. They think bubbling in a multiple choice question will determine success. That's outlandish. In fact, these tests are too crude to be used and should be abandoned, but don't take my word for it. Take Frederick J. Kelly, the man who invented standardized testing, who said, and I quote, "These tests are too crude to be used and should be abandoned." Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if we continue down this road, the results will be lethal. I don't have much faith in school, but I do have faith in people. And if we can customize healthcare, cars, and Facebook pages, then it is our duty to do the same for education, to upgrade it, change it, do away with school spirit, because that's useless. Unless we're working to bring the spirit out of each and every student, that should be our task. No more Common Core. Instead, let's reach the core of every heart in every class. Sure, math is important, but no more than art or dance. Let's give every gift an equal chance. I know this sounds like a dream, but countries like Finland are doing impressive things. They have shorter school days. Teachers make a decent wage. Homework is non-existent, and they focus on collaboration instead of competition. But here's the kicker, boys and girls. Their educational system outperforms every other country in the world. Other places like Singapore are succeeding rapidly. Schools like Montessori, programs like Khan Academy, there is no single solution. But let's get moving, because while students may be 20% of our population, they are 100% of our future. So let's attend to their dreams, and there's no telling what we can achieve. This is a world in which I believe. A world where fish are no longer forced to climb trees. I'll rest my case.
Wow. Your
Great.
thoughts about that?
That's wonderful.
Ooh. I can see you're leaning into this, Marie. What are your thoughts?
I agree exactly what they're saying. I think we need a lot of work. Gotta make some changes.
Yes, absolutely. And you see how some of the things he talked about is connected. Well, it will when you get into the historical, the timeline of public education, exactly what he's talking about. Who else would like to share? What are your reactions? What's confirming for you?
I'll share. I
Sure.
think what's confirming for me mostly is that, you know, things haven't changed, or things have changed. So for example, Common Core in math, the math that they teach now, I can't help my kid with the math, or I'm trying to help her with the math. And I'm like, why do you have to go? It's like, I was watching a comedy show and it was basically like, oh, well, this is the new math. And it's like, well, it's kind of like if someone were to come to my house, it's like, can I come through your front door? Oh, no, you got to go through the back door. I'm like, but do I still get to the same place that I wanted to go? Like, yeah, but this is the new thing to get to the same thing. And it's like, well, why did you do that? How does that even make sense? And how is that helping? I guess is always my question. Is like, why are we doing things different to get to the same thing, but it's not really helping get to a better place. And it's constantly happening in our school system. And it puts the parents, the teachers, and the children at a disadvantage because long-term, we get right back to the same place we were in the first place. It's just, again, this whole cycle of, you know, we're doing the same thing over and over with no results. And people are like, well, it's fine. We've been doing this for years. And that's basically the issue. So
that's the problem.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the veil has been revealed on this. We can't do that. And of course, we know now when the school buildings were closed and parents had to become teachers, that's where their frustrations were. You know, my son would call me and like, Mom, I can't help him. I mean, he has a sixth grader. Like, I've never seen this in my life, you know, and he's only 30 something and he's still so far removed. And so just think about that, the challenges that the parents had just through this COVID time of trying to educate their kids. And now, you know, and feel at a loss too, you know. And so that is so unfortunate. Absolutely. Who else would like to share your thoughts about the video? What are you thinking, Clayton? There you go. See, we're right on. We're on the same wavelength there.
I was going to say, like, everything he said in the video is true. I mean, if you think about it, like 150 years later, I think even just everyday way of life has changed quite a bit. So like you can teach the same way, but you're not necessarily adapting to sort of what's actually changing around us. So even that sense alone, there's so much that could be done differently. I wish I could say that our board ourselves can change that whole system in a matter of a couple of months of this discussion. But I think it's a good start. I mean, it's a great chance to do this now. But ultimately, in hopefully not 150 years, we'll get something different out of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and again, that's that lens that the board will be looking at things in a way that you ask your superintendent, again, not telling him how to do it, but are there different ways of doing this if we're trying to not just continue to do what we've always done? And I'm sure that that's where his mind is. He's trying to engage his staff so that they're not so frustrated and feeling personally attacked that I have been a teacher for 30 years and now you're saying I don't know how to do it. Well, no, what I'm saying is, you know, we have to focus on equity, and we know that the data shows us that we are not educating all of our children. So one thing we do have in common is that we want to educate all children. So what's the best way to go about doing this? And so all of this is going to be happening when you decided to focus on this equity work, which everyone should be. And it's not saying that no equity work is taking place in your district at all. We are now, it's now just going to be going to be named. It's going to be very clear, and it's going to be intentional and connecting the dots. That's what's happening now. So that's when you will have individuals who are ready to do this because they're like, I've been doing this. And yes, I am ready. I'm glad now we're naming it, that it's okay to do it, you know. And so what are your thoughts, other trustees? What are you thinking about the video? Name that
So
there.
as it was playing, my daughter actually walked by and named the video. She was like, "Oh, I watched that," and I said, "It just came out." And she was like, "No, I watched it. He was in a courtroom, right?" I said, "Oh yeah, okay." So it's funny the things that kids see on YouTube, but
Mhm.
it's- my thoughts were, you know, much like Trustee Jordan's, where it's we're not teaching critical thinking. And to backtrack to the whole Common Core, that's what I think that's why that was developed, so that they have critical thinking skills, but by way of math, which to me is not the best platform to teach critical thinking. And there are definite educational institutions that are disrupting the way we teach. Like I know Elon Musk has a school in LA that's very centered around critical thinking. Oracle has their own school here in Redwood City called Design Tech. They don't even have a bell schedule and they don't have teachers. It's pretty autonomous, and that works for some students, but not all. So not all can go to a tech school like that, because some do actually need the hand holding, and this is when the assignment is due, and those kids make up their own assignments, which is interesting. And I think we can take some things from that, but it doesn't work for everyone, and it's not accessible for everyone to be at a school like that. But there are other institutions, and there are ways to disrupt our current educational system.
Yeah, and as we know, education just in 2019, it will never be the same, you know, and we shouldn't expect when school, we're toward the end of the school year, just say, so in August, September, when school opens up for the next school year, are you going to be prepared to offer different tier type of learning? Because what if there are students who were not doing as well face to face, but you know what? Remotely, they are soaring. So are you going to take that opportunity from them, because we need all kids in schools? So that's a conversation a lot of boards are having, because if we're truly going to adjust and give children what they need, it would seem like it's a punishment for children who just don't operate well in the classroom setting. So are you going to offer once a week, everyone's remote or whatever? I don't know if the state is going to control that, or if they're going to allow the districts to be as creative, but you have to start thinking about what other type of learning environment are we going to give all of our students, because they're not cookie cutter. We can't give them, it's not a one size fits all. And so that's going to impact your equity work, because you have to make those decisions, allow parents, of course, to make the option, but they know what's best for their child. And we have to get away from thinking that the teachers or the adults on this side know what's best for children. Parents know what's best for their children, and we have to allow them to tell us that too. So, but just, and I don't know if the superintendent's doing this where he's like, Deborah, why did you even bring that up? I don't want to think about any other tier, but that's something that may be going through his mind, because it is a conversation that's happening all over the country. I have to just tell you that. So anyone else want to chime in about the video? Manafu, do you have any comments about the video at all? What are your thoughts?
I agree with everything that's already been said. I loved the video. I've seen different forms of the video. Well, my youngest daughter had just something, I forget the name of it, but it started with being a disruptor. And I was wondering what that was, but it was actually a bunch of students in New Zealand, and that's what caught her attention. And the reason why I share that is because the Finland model was something that a charter school in Utah had copied, or at least tried to embrace when they designed the school about 10 years ago, and they've just been really successful. And it's a Pacific Islander model. And it's funny too, because Dr. Jeff Andrade in the East Bay went out to New Zealand, and he speaks about this model. continuously and talks about how he has mimicked that model. And what it is bringing community into the classroom, and it's not just ethnic culture, it's community culture.
Community.
And how that impacts, the energy of the school and the level of ownership, so I know that our board, particularly in many community school districts in our area, have not, at least public schools, have not been able to get to that point. We dream of it. Watching this video, we know what we want to do. But on the other end, I think it's important to recognize how we're speaking to our families and educating them in being that kind of disruptor, in really asking, our school districts, our governing board. And it's weird to say that when we're the ones that are going to be held to that level of accountability. But the reality is that I know I teach my kids that you own that classroom. And, and I've got one kid who most of you know is just a little bit too vocal. My son Reno, I'm like, you're gonna have to just, step back a little bit. But the reality is that he's very vocal. So I kind of messed up when I actually influenced him to do that. But the reality is that we also have to teach our families how to use their voice through their students, and their students to use their voice to hold the educational system accountable. When they walk into that classroom, they need to be able to say, this is not what I thought I was going to learn, or this is not what I think I should be learning, and question it. And we need to be okay with that.
Yes.
That is a level of accountability. We need to be okay with that. We can't say, oh my God, that's a difficult parent or a difficult student, and take a punitive lens. We really have to say, question the why. If we have even one student that comes in and says, this is not what I thought I was getting, then we need to visit that. So that's my takeaway.
Absolutely.
I love
Absolutely. Good. Because again, you're lining the kids up as if they're in a factory. We're so used to just opening. There's this video too where it kind of opens up your head and it is just pouring the knowledge. That's what's expected. You just pour it and then they regurgitate. They're not no critical thinking, no analytical thinking, none of that. And so we have to make sure that we disrupt that, because there are classrooms that could be in your district, could be happening. Here, just go read this and then take up 45 minutes and read that. We might talk about it for 10 minutes and then the class is over. Is that acceptable? Again, raising the bar. And so those are all the areas that I'm sure your superintendent probably already knows, some areas that, we have to pay attention to this. Right, superintendent? I want to put words in your mouth. Yes, he's like, yes, yes, that's exactly how it is. So I want to make sure we're going to take a break in a little bit, but I want to really give you a chance to talk about the article on avoiding racial equity detours. Did you get a chance to read that article? Yes. Superintendent did. Yes. Anyone else? I see the smiles. That's not telling me yes.
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 I read all my stuff.
Okay. Well, and if you haven't, that's okay, because we can still have some dialogue. You have access to them. And Marie says you weren't a part of the first one. I would love to hear what did you glean from that article? It's really focusing on how schools are operating when you're trying to focus on just racial equity. How is staff being engaged? Are you supporting people who don't really want to do this, and you have disruptors? And then, it gets into what kind of programs do you have in place that really is not helping students, is perpetuating inequities, like the diversity day. I had a conversation with a district, started thinking about, do we have something like that, where we have a day that we're trying to engage students to learn more about? So we in this case, tell the Black students to go sit with the white kids or whatever. So think about that. Do you have anything? What did you glean from it, Marie? What did you pick up from the article that you would like to share?
Of what we have done, you mean?
Or anything in the article. I mean, there was so much, just talking about all the detours. And you may say, that's a detour in this district. Yeah.
Well, I think we have done some things to bring the different groups together.
Okay.
And one that we had a few years ago that I really enjoyed, where everybody had to do a study about a particular country and do everything, bring to us everything that they learned about it. And that was really amazing for me. In fact, I think part of it won an award in the county. But anyway, letting children be able to discuss with each other what their background is and what their beliefs are and what they've done and what they haven't done, and let everybody realize that we're a melting pot. We have many cultures together, and we need to respect and enhance and come to a complete circle that if somebody has something they believe in, that we respect that. I think the first word is respect. Respect, accept that people are different from each other, and try to understand why they believe something, why they eat something, why they wear some particular kind of clothes. I mean, I can remember a time when somebody didn't like to see a man wearing his head covered and he looked like a Muslim. Oh, he must be bad. Why is he walking down the street? It's okay to wear what your culture is, and it's everybody can't judge you by how you're dressed, or racial is the same thing. If you see a black man, you don't think right away he's going to do something wrong. I mean, every culture has something, believe me. Everybody has some struggles in the country they come from. But when we all come to America, we're American. We're American. We can keep what our background is, but we need to embrace everybody else. I just think that's a foundation that I don't know that parents teach their children that. Teachers probably don't teach the children that, and it gets carried away. And in some areas, it's worse than others. I think I grew up at a school that was very mixed with many different cultures, so we never had a problem with. At least we didn't growing up thinking anything being racial until you go somewhere else and see what people have gone through. So we need to teach all that. We need to teach that. Need to engage in the parents and let them know about it, to teach their children. And everybody together has to put a piece of the puzzle in there to make it work. Then you will find out that everybody, no matter who they are, where they come from, will succeed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Absolutely. Two things, and it's okay if you didn't have a chance to read this, because we will go into it more next time. But just thinking about, are we driven by authentic desire to do this work? Yeah, this is where you're going to find pockets of people like, not, I guess I'm gonna have to do this, because I need this job, whatever. And so in order to get that shifting, that mental model, getting everyone to see how they have a buy-in, you have to want to do this work.
Right.
And so if not, you will continue to practice behaviors on trying to fix those kids. If they would just do this, we won't have a problem, or we don't have any equity issues because everybody's fine. But thinking that equality, because that's easy. You're not ruffling anyone's feather. Give everyone the same piece of pie. And I would always say, thinking about a pie, cut it in 4 pieces. I divide, everyone gets a piece, but what if I haven't eaten in 3 days and you just had a steak and lobster dinner, do you really need that piece, or should I have it? So that's how you have to really start looking at equity. And so, but there are some triggers in this article, because it's really going deep about race, and knowing that you will have some individuals who will totally be against it. They don't believe it, that it's necessary, that I treat all people the same. I'm colorblind, blah, 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 which are words that we should really remove out of our vocabulary, but one thing I do want to say to you, Marie, I want you to consider.
Okay.
Because language, our words mean so much. So when you're doing this equity work, we have always been comfortable saying we're a melting pot, right? Now, I want you to kind of consider saying, envision like a Cobb salad. We know what a Cobb salad is, right? When you have everything, so you have the eggs, you have the lettuce, the bacon, the cheese, everything is lined up. And even if you start mixing it up, you know what? The eggs are still the eggs. The bacon is still the bacon. So when you're a melting pot, you're almost like assimilating in. You're taking away I don't want to be in a melting pot. I don't want you to I want to be a Black woman walking in the room. So if I'm a Cobb salad, I'm still going to be that cheese, regardless if you toss
Yeah.
it. So just something to consider.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
have to kind of start thinking differently on even our language, where we're so used to saying, not meaning anything negative about it, but really, if you're saying melting pot, you're taking away someone's identity. I'm not trying to be a melting. I don't know. I'm not a part of that. So that's just always a good example, because I love salads, and I use that as an example. And so this is probably a good time to take a little. How much of a break would you like? Because I want to make sure Nicole has ample time to really take you down a couple rabbit holes we need to take you through. So what do you think? 10 minutes, 5 minutes? What's a good break? 5? Clayton says 5. What do you want? 5 is good?
That's 5's good.
Okay. We'll take 5 minutes. It is, I was going to say it's 10 o'clock here.
Oh, it's only 8 o'clock here.
I know. I hang out all night with you guys if I have to.
Thank you.
So we'll take a 5-minute break, right?
Okay.
So just turn your microphones off, mute your mics and your camera if you like to, but 5-minute break.
back.
Great. Are you able to keep up with us, Marie? I know you were, you didn't do the first session and we're not leaving you behind. It seems like you're
No.
you're right there with us.
Thank you. I think I am.
Good, good. Everybody's good because I'm getting ready to turn you over to Nicole.
We're ready.
We're good. All right. Thank you guys for allowing me to take you on that journey. And now I'm going to pass it off to my partner in our work. I'm not even going to say partner in crime because
No.
we're my partner in our work that we do. And there you go, Nicole, turning it over to you.
All right. Well, it might be considered a crime to some we're doing, so we got to keep that in context. But I will say I really appreciate hanging out with you tonight and just listening to some of the dialogue around what the history kind of means to you. I just want to acknowledge Manifo, when you mentioned watching that timeline, and just kind of I heard you say like my personal experience, right? Is what I heard. Like you can see like your own experience in that timeline, and that's pretty powerful. And the timeline represents like historical facts, right? Those are not our opinions, right? Those are things that show up as history in our, at least, education system in the United States. And I want to call that out for a minute because as you're kind of going into the context of equity and kind of our, understanding of history, but where does this sit in our governance space? And specifically based on the fact that there are going to be a lot of, I think Deborah said, pushback to this work. And so sometimes just addressing the pushback as a governance team is to share the facts, share the data, and then allow people to come to their own conclusion about what it means to them. We don't have to force this down anyone's, throat around, here's what we believe. And that's, I think I heard you say, like, we want to be a community of learners, right, together on this equity journey. And I really appreciate that. But that history timeline is hard to argue. And some of it's law, right? Like there's experiences there, but most of those are attached to law and policy. And when you connect to your own experiences, and I think, Andrea, you did that when you talked about the formula of 10, right? And then looking at California's history about how we excluded children, and fast forwarding to what sometimes seems remnant of what we see now, right? Is maybe it's not explicitly saying that we're excluding you based on these vicious, filthy habits, but it definitely shows up in the actions of adults around who is allowed to be served in certain ways in schools versus who's not. And that's, I think, more dangerous than ever, and why I think I often hear people say out loud as we speak that racism and different forms of oppression don't exist. And literally that is something that our leaders are combating as we speak, because you're engaging in this work as a team. So the deeper you go, the more you may interrupt, right, some thinking that some may not have in alignment with you and in your truth. As Deborah talked about the 4 agreements, their truth may be different. So as you think about like the work we're doing tonight, a lot of this is to get you, kind of building your equity muscles to also combat some of the resistance. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to stand for something, right? And even though this is very complex work, and all of us, we come together, 5 board members and superintendents, you come together as this team, right? Versus just individuals. And what happens is you have to have a collective, common organizational vision, common language around what equity means in Jefferson. And that's the work I want to transition into now, is to make sure that as we do this work, you have common language so that you can educate the community, that you can help people lean in to this work, and that no, there's not one way to do equity work, right? I think that's where people get stuck, is they hear equity, so then they hear race, and it's like, equity and race are not necessarily the same thing, right? Equity is really around like this big picture, like Deborah said, it's giving kids what they need. Now, what's in that umbrella is a lot, right? And it's not just based on race. It's not just based on one way of doing things. And so what I want to share with you tonight is a little context about equity, and have you all walk through continuously developing your equity statement, so that as you think about when we revisit your equity policy that you adopted, we can we can massage it into language that we can own, and it really align with your governance work. Okay. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a couple of things to think about. And here's one that's, I think, really critical to the work. And I'm not on the right slide. There we go. Uh-oh. So I'm going to pause just for a second. Kick me out because it thinks I'm going to say something profound, I think. So let me let it. It's give me a second. And it's probably because I shared my screen and they don't like what I was going to share.
It's a safe space, so it's not a problem for us.
Okay. I told you, it kicked me out, but it let me back in. All right, here we go. All right. So what you see here on the screen is just a little bit of context for why it's so important to develop an equity statement. And so one is, as I mentioned, it's a way for you to clearly communicate and create common language, right? That is clear to everyone in the school district, but specifically around how you develop a lens for how you do the work in the school district. So equity, again, is not just one thing. It's not the education side of the house, right? It's not just preschool. It's not just one part of your district. It is the lens by which we do everything. And that's very important when we talk about taking this to a space of communicating to like our teachers, for example, right, who will find like equity work to be very hard because a lot of this is going to land in the classroom on their shoulders. And we have to make sure people understand that equity work is not necessarily another check the box, a thing to do. It is a lens by which we do everything. So how our kids go to the play yard, right, and how we supervise them, and how we look at what books we're going to bring into our classrooms, how we look at what food we feed them, right? All of those things are going to come up, right? It's not just academics. It's not just one version of how we do this work. It's about everything we do, and it's a lens. It is a component of your equity policy. So bless you.
Thank
It's
you.
a component.
Sorry.
And it's contagious. I sneezed earlier, but it's contagious, huh? It's getting late. Maybe that's it. But the component of your equity policy, you're going to see your statement fit into that space. Okay, so it's not like these are two separate things, right? This really folds into your policy. It should be student-centered. I think we all would agree, right? When we do equity work, it's important people know that this is not about adults. Although equity applies to all stakeholders. I want to be very clear, right? If we don't have healthy adults, it's hard to have healthy students. Speaking of Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade, one of the things he would talk about is when people would ask for support from a consultant standpoint, they'd want, him and his team to come in and look at like, we need to address the student culture. We got a lot of suspensions and the schools are, out of control, and we need you to come and help us. And one of the things he would say is, well, when I come and deal with student climate and student culture, I'm not going to come and look at the students. The students are fine. Usually it's because the adult culture is not healthy. And so again, it has to be student-centered because this is about outcomes for our kids, right? And of course, adults matter. Every stakeholder, our parents, everyone matters. But this is really centered around kids and all kids, right? If we have any groups of kids who are not getting what they need, that's where we know that we have work to do. It explicitly calls out the inequities in the data. So one thing about your equity statement, as we develop it today, I want you to think about like where in the data are we seeing those equity gaps, and we have to call it out in our statement, right? So where do we see that? If we see in our data, we see students with special needs, right? We've seen this constant perpetuation of a gap that's happened over the years. So we need to call that out, right? So yes, equity work is about making sure all kids have what they need, but the work is also about closing gaps for the kids who need it the most. So you got to call it out. It's measurable. It's a big deal. It's measurable and it's associated with data. So for governance teams, it's really important because Deborah mentioned earlier, when you talk to your superintendent, but also your staff, right? The staff that presents to you, absolutely, you have to be able to ask questions that show up in the form of data, right? There has to be evidence. So when we talk about having an equity statement, can I measure that it's happened? Right. And that's going to be very, very important. It can't be some arbitrary thing that you can't measure, else you'll never be able to see that you've accomplished that goal. So your equity statement needs to be something you can measure, like you can see it happen. it should normally align with your mission and vision. So one of the things that we often get excited about is when governance teams work on an equity statement, you almost simultaneously are working on your vision and your mission statement. For many folks who are revising it, your equity statement work actually ties right into your vision and mission statement. So when we say equity in Jefferson is this, you're really almost calling out your mission and your vision, right? What do we want to see? Where do we want to go? Our vision. And then our mission is kind of how we're going to get there, right? And so that ultimately usually shows up and should align with your mission and vision statements. And again, for some districts, as they're revising those, sometimes the equity statement becomes the mission and the vision, which is not a bad idea. And then lastly, of course, it includes your stakeholder voices. So tonight, while we're going to work through this process, and I'm going to kind of walk you through, it is important you recognize that tonight a little bit of non-closure has to be accepted because there are multiple people who are not in the room with us tonight, aka our kids, right? Our parents. I mean, there's a whole community that needs to weigh in on what equity means, so that as a governance team, you're going to set the vision for what equity is through your statement, but you want to do that with feedback so we have a really good sense of that. Equity is about giving kids what they need in Jefferson, right? Because one thing that people do is they'll adopt a statement that's kind of general, but it doesn't really speak to the needs of the actual district because your kids have their own unique needs. The district next door has its own unique needs. So you want to make sure you have a collective common vision around what equity is, and it requires people to be a part of that process. I do want to say this though. We don't want to take forever though to create our equity statement and adopt it, because sometimes what happens is we feel like we need more input, we need more input, we need more and more and more, and so we never adopt it, right? We just spend a lot of time waiting for input, and that's important, but there's a point you are going to adopt it and then add that to your policy, and it is what it is. This is our statement, our vision as a board, and yes, we always want to get feedback and always include the community, but this is our vision and our statement that we have for our school district, because that's your roles. You are the policymakers, you're the visionaries. Okay. There were some samples that were shared. Did those show up in your package, your sample equity statements? Did those come in through okay? Okay, they did not. Okay. And I usually share them in a separate Google folder. So if it didn't show up in there, it's okay. What I'll do is I'll share it in our next session for you all to go back to. But what I want to do is I don't want to give you, let me see if I can share. Yeah, if it didn't show up in the packet, I won't go through sharing the screen.
Yeah, we just had the sample equity policy, but not.
Yeah, you have that one. Okay, but the statements didn't show up. Okay, no worries. There's like 4 of them that I've shared with folks. And so I'll just share it with you for your next session. But one of the reasons why I bring it up is as you're doing this work, I want you to also be mindful of what people's equity statements have been like in other districts, and also just the context of what people are calling out. Okay. And so I may share my screen in a moment, but what I want to do is kind of go back to what you all said equity meant to you. So I'm going to pause for a second. Do y'all remember on April 1st, we talked about equity, and I asked you all to share one word that described equity to you. Do you remember that? And you all not only shared your word, and then you did the elevator speech. You remember that, the 30-second elevator speech? Okay. You still remember it? This is a quiz now. Watch this.
I remember that it happened. I don't remember what I said.
Right. Now what I said, no, it's all good. So here's what I did, because I knew you all would have slept by then, since then, right? So I actually was taking notes and hearing you that day. And what I did is I wrote down words that I heard. I heard words like access, impartial, level playing. Remember, some of us were like, I can use a hyphenated version. Systems, access achieved. And so yes, Monica, you're remembering. Yep, your word was access. And so Marie, I know you were not there, so I would love to hear your perspective about if you could choose one word that describes equity to you in education, what would that word be first? I'll give you a couple moments to think about it, but what would be that one word? If you could sum it up in one, how would you describe equity in education?
Availability? Would that be?
Availability?
Yeah.
Okay. I like it. Availability. Now tell me more. Tell me more about availability. And here's what they had to do. I'll let you cheat for a little while, but they only
Okay.
had 30 seconds to tell
Okay.
their definition
Okay. Okay.
of why they chose their word. But tell us a little bit about what availability, why that came up for you as far as equity.
Well, I think that if we give everybody the tools they need, the information they need, then they'll know how to apply that. That's what I was
Okay.
trying to say. Does that make sense, or do I have to go
Yeah.
deeper?
Well, when you mentioned available, what came to mind when you making sure the resources are available is what I
Yes.
think I hear you saying.
Yeah,
Got it.
resources. Yeah.
Okay. I love it. Got it. Okay. All right. Does anyone else want to share a little bit about what they recall in that discussion around the definition of equity for you, or anything you want to add to what we may have talked about before I share? I'm going to share back to you kind of a mirror about of your definition, because I put it all together and made just kind of a definition for you that we're going to wordsmith and tear up in a moment. But anyone want to share or add to our conversation about what you recall about equity, what it means? Okay. All right. Before I share, why is it important that you have a common definition? What would you say? Why is it so important that the team, as a governance team, has a common definition of equity?
We're on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely being on the same page. Tell me more. Keep adding in.
Me or somebody else?
Anyone. Yeah, anyone.
Oh.
But I love it. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's going to drive our directives.
It's going to drive your directives. Yeah. Yep. Do you have an example of that?
Specific to equity?
Well, in terms of the directive piece. So if you had like, why is it important? We have this common language, so it drives our directives. Do you have an example of what that might be?
So like we just recently changed a couple of words in our meeting guidelines that
Okay.
you saw at the very beginning of the meeting. And I think that that was really important because there was a change in the overall makeup of the team. So with our new board member. So I think it was important for us to come together to be on the same page as to how we're going to conduct our meetings and
Got it.
our
Yeah.
way of, our decorum and how we treat each other,
Absolutely.
and respect
Absolutely.
was a big thing. And so we included that word in our guidelines. So
Yeah.
that's
Excellent.
being on the same page and having the same
Absolutely.
verbiage and the same idea
There you go.
directs us, in a very specific lane
Yeah.
to be in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Great example. Great example. Yeah, I gotta steal that and remind several governance teams we work with how that was really, really a perfect example of your norms, right? And how you're just your culture of how you want to work together and be on the same page. That's huge with this work, especially with equity work, because it is so full of emotions, right? You're all kind of passionate about it. And what happens when emotions go into a space, right? Sometimes people get pushed one direction, another direction, because emotions change, right? There's levels of emotions, but with being on the same page, having common language, whatever you do, you all have a similar way of seeing how you want to move forward. So I love the word direction, right? And that direction could be in many ways. It could be down to something as serious as a major decision you have to make when you need to vote, right? Deborah and I always talk about how we encourage boards to be a 5-0 or to be a 7-0, whatever that makeup is, because ultimately that really speaks volumes about after the vote, what happens in that work, right? Behind that vote. And understand that you all have like your own right to vote for what you feel is your perspective, which is what the beauty of a board is. There's diversity, but we often talk about being on the same page because equity work is not lightweight work, right? It's not a small decision you make. It typically is a big deal. And so Bernie, jump in, please.
Yeah, I was just going to add that equity is a small, simple word, but a very complex concept.
Yeah.
And so if we could distill it down into a simple definition,
right,
that we can agree to, then when I say equity, I know that you understand what I mean.
Yep.
And I'm not saying equity and you think I'm saying equality, and someone else thinks I'm saying access, and somebody else believes I'm saying opportunity. you know, that if we've come to our definition or the way that we want to understand that word, when we
Yep.
speak it and use it, then we know what we're talking about.
Love
Because
it.
it is a very, I mean, we're spending at least 4 sessions on this,
That's right.
and
yeah.
we're going to end, and we're still going to be newcomers to this
Right,
work,
right.
right? We're not going to be experts. So, and it's all in
Yeah,
one
yeah.
word. So,
Absolutely. No, well said. And it is complex. And so, I think it's a great segue into what I took your complex conversations, your 30-second elevator speeches. And so what I did is put them together, and I tried to create a hopefully simple definition, but this is our opportunity to kind of tear it up and come together and look at how we want to define equity in Jefferson, okay, and starting with our team. So what you see on the screen, let me make it a little bit bigger, and I'm going to wordsmith as you as you so choose for me to do. And as you look at this definition, what I did is I took your words and I tried to create actually some language. And so I kind of put at that first top paragraph, what equity means. And then I actually added some bullet points on like what it might look like, right? And so this is just a rough draft. And so I want you to just take a look, think about what's resonating with you. The words in bold are actually words that came from you in listening to your 30-second elevator speeches. Grammatically, it's not perfect on purpose because we're going to wordsmith and massage in a moment, but I just want you to take a look, see what's resonating with you. And we're going to kind of take a stab at crafting, massaging this. All right, so as you're processing, what I'm going to do is just kind of open it up for the group to share what's resonating with you, what questions you have, maybe some edits, what would make more sense. So this is your opportunity to just tear this up, and we're not going to go deep into the weeds, but this is opportunity to look at wordsmithing. It is an opportunity to look at how would we make this make sense for us. So it's just a rough draft, a starting point. Now let's start to massage it. So anyone jump in, unmute yourself, and let's take some time to unpack it. What's resonating with you? I'll start there. What's resonating with you? Clayton, why don't you jump in? What's resonating with you right now?
Sure. I was trying to remember what we talked about during the last meeting. So I'm trying to remember what was the discussion. I will say one of the things that I think is important to me at the very end of the first sentence, talk about doing all those things as a need to in order for them to reach their full potential.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing just to highlight, make sure that that's always in the clear focus, especially understanding access to fair and quality resources, which I think some students probably get, but probably not every student gets the best they can to reach their full potential. So
got it. Yeah. So you feel like that's resonating with you and very much needed to be called out. Got it. Powerful. Okay. Anyone else want to add to what Clayton shared, or another perspective on what's resonating with you?
I agree with Clayton, Trustee Koo. The top paragraph there resonates with me, and so does the first bullet point. The second and third bullet point, I like them, but I don't know. I'm just trying to think of different language, but the message, I agree with the message.
Yeah.
But the first half of it, like I said, the paragraph and the first bullet point.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to less other words. But other
Absolutely.
than that, I think I actually like it all.
Mhm,
I just
mhm.
I just know that my personal preference would be to find
Yeah,
different words.
absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I literally, this is rough. And I took exactly the words I heard from y'all and tried to kind of create some grammatical sense to it. So it's definitely needs some massaging, but I'm glad the concepts, like we're capturing the concepts that you feel are important. So it's good to know. Good to know.
I would just propose that maybe we consider a different word than fair,
Yeah.
just because fair is so often conflated or means the same as equal,
Uh-huh.
which isn't always equitable. So we often say, yes, you're right, it's not fair, but it is what is needed. It's equitable.
Right.
So I think if we could think of another word
Sure.
that,
I was
Yeah.
actually
so
just
so it doesn't get mixed up with that whole
Got it.
concept.
So I'm going to share where I think Clayton, I think I got this from your description, and you mentioned more like a fair shot, like they get the fair shot, and kind of like opportunity is something that kind of came to mind as well. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, I remember because I remember my phrase was the hyphen one. It was the level playing field.
It
one.
was. Yep. Yep.
So
Yeah.
I do remember saying something similar, but I do agree kind of like maybe fair is a very, I mean, it depends on how you define the word fair, right? Because fair to like me and you could be totally different.
Right. Right.
So I think that might open, like as Superintendent Vidal says, probably open to too much interpretation.
Got
Especially
it.
here.
How does this look? How does that look? Now, opportunity is a little bit more, because you use the word fair shot is what I recall. And so like having a fair shot means I have an opportunity is what I was thinking. And now it's not so. So how does that, and access and opportunity are often used in similar spaces. So how does that look?
Could I make a suggestion?
Sure, go ahead.
I was gonna say appropriate instead of fair. So it goes along the line that it's tailored to their needs.
So tell me, where do you see that fitting in? Is it in the bullet points or in the first paragraph still?
So back to fair and quality. So it would be appropriate resources.
Got it.
Appropriate
Okay,
and
so
quality.
Okay, so let me see something.
That doesn't really make sense.
Okay, so that's if I took this piece out.
Right.
Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, it's just a suggestion, but just to answer to the word fair.
Got it. Okay. Okay. All right, we're just massaging it. No right or wrong answer, just massaging it.
And then one other thing, sorry, on top of, it's so much more easier when it's already laid out in front of you to kind of critique it and
and that's why I did it. I just took your words and put it right to you all and try to make it grammatical sense, but it needs to make sense to you all, and that's why we're doing this. So there's a lot to massage in this, of course, and so you're just kind of starting the process, so it's all good.
Okay, great. I just didn't want to seem like I was nitpicking at what you did because it's amazing.
No, this is it. This is a nitpicking process. So it's totally, I'm here totally to support you all going through this because you don't always get an opportunity to do this. So this is what the work's about. So yeah, absolutely.
So just fleshing out the last part of the sentence, and I'm not saying anything grammatically correct right now, but so based on their needs in order to reach their full potential, but we're saying that this is here so that they can, but I kind of wanted to flesh out that this is here because it's important in order for them to do so. So it's not just there, we're laying it out and then, pick it up if you want to, but this is actually a very important piece that needs to be implemented in order for them. So something to the effect of like, based on their needs, as it is an important part of ensuring learning success. So based on their needs in order to reach their full potential, and as an important or a key factor in them being successful students or ensuring learning success. I don't know, maybe that's too wordy.
Yeah, you know what? I think, no, I hear you. I know what you're saying. And I'm wondering, do you find that may fit into describing what the work includes?
Yeah, it could go down
You
there.
know what I mean? Because I hear what you're saying. Like, it's like up here, it's kind of like we're stating we're committed to ensuring, right? And these are the things you called out, but then like you're going into like, the importance of it. And so I feel like it fits somewhere maybe and might be missing in one of these bullet points. If you want to add a bullet point, great. Most people don't go past 3 or 4 bullet points, but maybe it's in that space, do you think? Or do you feel like you want to add it to that first paragraph?
I don't know, maybe I'm being redundant. I just wanted to make it, like very direct and blunt that this is happening because it's a key factor.
It's a key factor. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Someone have a thought on how to, I get it. And I'm just, let me look at it from a distance and see.
Mabel, do you see a place to add learning success and maybe the third bullet? The way that I heard you wanting to focus on learning success.
Yes.
Maybe in your mind you were focusing on something else, but what I heard was the learning success was important.
Yes.
I'm wondering if maybe that third bullet can incorporate learning success since it is in that general area.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to put it here so the words are here. And you mentioned it is important or even critical for, so I'm going to put it here. It was critical or important for learning success. I'm going to put it here just so we have the wording and then we'll figure out where to place it. Cause I get what you're saying too. So does that sound okay?
Yes, absolutely.
And then we'll see where we can place it. Cause I think as you all keep massaging this, you're going to find that that's going to fit somewhere. It makes a lot of sense. All right, keep going, keep going. You all are on a roll. You're on a roll.
I had a comment about number 3, the resetting levels of growth. I think.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, is there by chance a better way? I don't know if anybody else has a better way of saying that.
Yes. So yes, that was yours. Yeah, that was yours, Clayton. So I was going to ask you. I loved it though.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm reading it now. Like I think that phrase, like, it's a little bit too difficult for someone to understand.
What about this? Because I often use this word. Because I think I kind of hear you saying like how we define student success, and you mentioned like there's different levels of growth, right? And I feel like levels of success, like in how kids kind of grow. And I think you use the word pace too, so that's why I put those together. So yeah, grammatically it may not make sense the way I put them together, but I think your concept is brilliant. So reimagining student success, and I'm going to go like this for a minute. And somehow through it's almost like recognizing, or it's something around understanding,
incorporating
like
or recognizing, maybe including, recognizing, including, or incorporating, taking into account.
I think taking into account.
Accounting for.
Okay.
Facilitating.
So that may be over here. That might be the word we were missing. There's a word here. I think this is what was missing. And here's where I was thinking about this one. You all remember I gave you this sample of the National Equity Project definition. And this was the one I was kind of missing on this fourth bullet of where to fit this in. And this might be it, is that there's the work includes facilitating. I was trying to think of what that would be, because there's a lot of things you can do to facilitate learning success. And so that might be one way to fit that in, but just an idea, just to see if it makes sense to that critical, that piece about what's critical for learning success and that full potential piece. And so that's, I don't know, Maybelle, if that actually helped a little bit with that. I'm gonna get Deborah and Nicole's name out of here because this is taking up space. There we go. Uh-oh, that's not what I meant to do.
You lost everything
Whoops.
else.
That's not what I meant to do. I meant to do this.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, but did that help a little bit about Maybelle? Do you feel like that was, did that connect the dot maybe or no?
It for me it does, but I don't want to,
Okay.
it's a communal effort. So
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like when I put this together, I was missing a bullet point. And so I think you helped kind of fill in some of that. So we're still working on it though. So keep going. You all keep going. And if this helps, one way when you develop your statement, I'm going to go back to this piece. Remember this bullet point here about, is it measurable and associated with data? So as you're going through developing your statement, can you measure this? Can you measure this? So that's something to think
I
about.
have a
as you're
question about on
Yeah.
that first bullet.
writing.
Intentionally interrupting failed systems that harm marginalized student groups. I get
Yeah.
that. But do we harm the marginalized student groups through impartial policies and practices? That's how sometimes when I read
No,
it.
yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. So it was more about intentionally interrupting
Yeah.
through impartial policy. Yeah. So that we can massage it.
So it was like
I was trying to pull those two
through it.
words together. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you say intentionally interrupting failed systems that have harmed marginalized student groups by implementing impartial, isn't that?
By adopting?
Yeah, maybe by adopting. I think that then negates the negative again, right?
How about that? Because adopting is one, right?
Yeah.
So you all are policy folks, and then you got implementation, right? Which is doing the work, right? How does that look? Maybe too wordy? Is it too wordy? And again, I think it was so Andrea mentioned impartial, right? So it's not just focus on one particular thing, being very impartial. And then I think Maybelle, you mentioned the systems piece. I think I got that piece, in that you mentioned people don't fail, systems do. That was really powerful and stuck out to me. So that's where those two words came from that were in bold in that first bullet point. Andrea, do you remember that piece when you talked about impartial? Do you feel like I captured that, or is that maybe out of context on the way that I placed it in there?
No, I actually like the way that's
Okay.
placed there. Yes.
Okay. 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 All
I
right.
was going to ask them about number 4.
Uh-huh.
I know that it's like a draft equity statement, so I was wondering, like, I know it says like facilitating equitable practices. Do you normally use I wasn't sure if it was okay to use that in there, or do we need to find another way to say that?
You could. Yeah, it's your statement. I've seen lots of different ways, and so the word equitable practices came up to me just because without you, so here's the hard part where you're trying to create this statement, but without going deep into the weeds of what those practices are, I was trying to stay very general. And so that's where I kind of thought that word might fit in. But it doesn't have to. Like, that was just kind of my thinking to kind of connect that piece, because all of these are like the bullet points are the action piece, right? Like what you're doing, what it looks like in action. And of course you can go even deeper, right? And look at these and go, okay, we can really call out what this looks like. But the equity statement is not designed to go into the weeds, because that's where your kind of policy your policy kind of ARs show up, right? Your board policy piece. So we don't want to go too far in the weeds. So it's really more about big picture. But tell me what you're thinking, Clayton. You feel like it's another word that comes to mind in terms of facilitating, or I think someone said facilitating. That's where that word jumped in. And I think I was thinking of facilitating what, right? So what might that be? Yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna think about this one.
I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. What are y'all thinking? What do you think?
So when I see bullet number 2 and number 3, I'm feeling like they may be somewhat similar. So fostering a level playing field and reimagining student success. You know, when it says focusing on what students do best, if they already have unique gifts, talents, and interests, isn't that what they do? They're doing what they do best by, I guess, saying that they have these, or we're acknowledging or recognizing that they have these unique gifts, talents, and interests. So I'm not sure if everyone agrees with that, or if they're like, it should be 2 different points, or if we could merge the 2 somehow.
Right.
I'm trying to think through that.
Yeah. Yeah, they have some similarities. I agree. Yeah. What do y'all think? Bullet points 2 and 3 have some similarities. And I think level playing field, I think Clayton, that was your piece that we pulled from. And then focusing on what kids do best, I think was Maybell. I think I pulled that from your comments about what kids do best. And so maybe that is similar to unique gifts, talents, and interests. So would it be something where we literally kind of take this one out or incorporate it into this 3rd bullet? Or does this fall into level playing field is equitable practices?
I sort of like the 3rd one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first bullet point is kind of negative, which I don't like. If I'm going to make something for the future, I want it to be what we're going to do, rather than somehow I don't like that first sentence. But I do like the second one.
Is it this word right here, Marie, like the harmed, marginalized?
Yeah. I think that's just, I don't want to say it like that. I want to put in that our equity work is what we're doing, and not to say what we failed, rather than saying adopting this from here forth.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the systems piece was I think maybe you'd called out the failed systems. And so one of the things I wanted to call out for this piece, and Marie, you're right, like if it doesn't necessarily sound like is positive as other ones, right? But what I wanted to share with you is back to this slide here where we talked about calling it out. Like, how do you explicitly call out the inequities? And so this was that bullet point that kind of gets you to hint that there are groups of kids that you specifically are doing this work for, and without apology, right? So how do you call that out, right? And so maybe there's some other way you want to do that, but some people use marginalized, some will use even say historically marginalized, but it's calling out the inequities, what it is. So how do you word that, so it sounds like you said, the work we're doing now, but it definitely is about, like, there are groups of kids now who are part of a historically marginalized group. And that kind of goes back to when you all saw that definition. Let me do this real quick while I'm thinking about it. I think I have it pulled up here. Let me pull it up real quick. I'm going to go back to your other session with the definition from the National Equity Project. I think that might be helpful to see some of the wording. Let me grab that real quick. And you remember they called out removing the predictability of success or failure. And so I know Marie you didn't get to see this one. So this might give you some ideas, but here was the sample definition. Let me blow this up for you. Remember that one? You see that first bullet, Maria, is kind of calling out like that, calling out racial, cultural, social factors. So it's really calling out specifics around, we have this predictability of success or failure. So it's really being intentional, but here's one thing they did put, if you notice, ensuring equally high outcomes, right? So, so they called it out in a different way, but maybe that give you some ideas of language there.
Yeah. Okay, I was thinking we were making it just the positive way of what we want to do, but you're saying you want to say what the inequities are first. Okay.
I think so. And here's why, is that if you don't call it out, then how do you ever measure that you did it? And I think that's the hard part, because remember, equity gaps show up in lots of different ways. So, I mean, it might be in discipline, it might be in student achievement. It could be access to your advanced courses, right? Like GATE and all the different ways that kids are kind of have access, which you called out in your definition. So it's really calling it out, because this work is because what? Why are we doing this work again? Because we have inequities, right? And so I think it's hard to say that in a pretty way, but I get what you mean. Like, I definitely get it. Okay. And so I don't know if that helped. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts around that, because Maurice has a really good point, and this is one to really wrestle with, I think, around, let me make this bigger for you all. I know you all are trying to see it I'll keep refreshing it for you. But that first bullet is what she's referring to. And so the word failed system, I don't know, Maybelle, you had mentioned systems was your word, right? So I was trying to pull out that word, and I used fail because you kind of called it out, that people don't fail, systems do. And that's where that came from. Do you feel like the word failed is needed in this space, or can we reword this in a way that really calls out these inequities? I guess a loaded question.
I know. It's flexing my critical thinking skills here.
I know, at 9 o'clock at night, right?
I mean, I know it has a negative connotation, but I think what we're doing has a historical context of being negative. So it's hard to skeet skirt around that. But as far as using the word failed, I know we don't want to put a negative foot forward first. But
can you use another word?
I would still like to answer to the fact and present that, because I use system because it is institutional. We going back to talking about how, we lack the staff and teachers lack the professional development of reaching our students culturally, and the whole curriculum and books that we've contracted with, the vendors that we contract with have a history of leaving certain groups out or not really mentioning them, or it's Native Americans are stuck in this one little key chart in a whole entire book of American history. So I would like to keep systems in there, because it answers to the fact that this is an institutionalized thing. This is not just one individual or some hater over here or whatever. Right. This is something that is very broad and reaches everybody. And not only is it very broad, it's also a core thing. So what we're trying to do is not change one person's mind. We're trying to change an entire system.
Good point. Good point.
So I would like to keep that word in there, but
Okay,
you know,
yeah.
saying the word failed, or we could definitely use something else.
Yeah. How does this look? Because what you just said was really helpful. So structure systems is like you said, there's a lot that happens within systems, and you all are calling out systems are like the policies, right? It's the practices and the people are within that system. And then structures is a word that others have used too, and have used them both, which really speaks about not only policies and practices, but um, almost like constructs, right? And I can even use that word as well, that are literally like boxes, like things that are deeply held beliefs, right? And structures that are in place that have not changed, right? And I think that's another word you can call out that's not so explicit around like the failed system. Because I will say this, we're public school educators, we champion public education, right? So to say failed system, right, I kind of agree with Marie, like, oh, maybe that's a little bit too much, because like, then why are we doing this, right? So so how does that look if I put in systems and structures, or just leave it as systems, interrupting systems?
I like adding the structure because it is, it's, I think of it in terms of like technology and process. It's like systems is the technology, structure is the process. And together, if you don't have a good process, but you have a good system, then it's not going to go together. So I like both.
Yeah, I agree with that as well too.
Got it. Okay, good. I'm glad we captured that. Marie, does that feel a little better?
Yes, it does feel a little better.
Good.
It does feel better.
Okay. All right, and you all good about calling out the marginalized student groups? Because one of the things we don't have here, and I have always, you know, felt like this is okay, is you haven't called out any specific groups in the data except marginalized, which I think is fine because it leaves you open to talking about any inequities that occur, not just one group. Like some groups like to call out, you know, their students based on ethnicity or based on economics, right? And they kind of go through like those demographic bullet points. But sometimes it's like when you say marginalized, there's a whole lot that goes into that, right? Because there's intersectionality, as we call it, right? Where there's more than one way to be oppressed. And so while one kid may fall in the category of not historically being marginalized based on ethnicity, but then they identify with another part of their kind of identity that is marginalized. Now, like, how do you like determine, like, do I support this? Is this? So it's really kind of calling out all groups when you say marginalized. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So are you all okay with that? Because it's calling it out and it's being explicit, but it's not going deep into the weeds. So you don't put yourself in a box and say that our equity statement only applies to certain kids, right? But and you're calling out like based on marginalized, you can pull up data associated with that. That's the great piece about it. But it kind of stays general. Does that sound okay? You feel comfortable with that? Okay, cool.
I'm wondering if the members of the board want to include anything around, we discussed earlier, the mental mindsets, belief systems, challenging those, and implicit or explicit biases.
Yep.
That sort of undergird a lot of the inequitable practices that we might be fulfilling.
Good one.
So I don't know where that would fit. If you wanted to put it in there, but I sort of feel like that popped out to me when you showed us the National Equity Project one, where they talked about what did the implicit
examining bias, and let me go back to it. Boop, there it is. So they call out basically interrupting inequitable practices, which you all kind of called out, right? I think that's where that word came from. And then examining biases. So you're actually calling out that space. And so let me go back to yours and see. So what we could do maybe is kind of massage this last bullet, is you're calling out facilitating equitable practices and examining biases that impact, let me see, let me just try this. don't know, maybe that makes sense. Let me look, I gotta sit back.
Well, they're
on
sort
it.
of different, right? One of them is a
They are.
positive and the other one's
Yeah.
a negative.
They are. Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. So let me see something. Because you also called out this, so interrupting was up here as well. So it's kind of like, I don't want it to be redundant if you all would feel it's redundant, but you're right. It's a positive and it's a negative.
Can you flip the phrases around, examining biases to help facilitate?
Yep.
And the reason I point that out is because that's where I've engaged on one-on-one conversations with staff
Right.
members.
Right.
You know, the individuals might say, we all have biases. We can't be humans without a bias. We have to, you know, it helps us make decisions. And I say, you're right. We just have to know which of our biases are actually harming others and which of our biases we need to disrupt in ourselves so that we don't harm others. So.
Absolutely. Facilitation. Did I mess that up? No, it should fit. Is that not spelled
I
right?
think there's
It's a grammatical issue. Yeah.
It's an extra.
Examining biases to support the facilitation of equitable practice that are critical to learning success.
Is facilitation spelled wrong?
I thought it wasn't, but you know, it is 9 o'clock at night. So
Okay.
I think it's just moving.
Are there
right
two
now.
I's or is there another? Oh, there it is. FACI is what you want. Oh, you got it.
Facilitation. Yeah. Yep. I think it just was
Okay.
moody for a second. I think it was delayed. Yeah. So how does that look? And I, you know what, this bullet is one where you can measure this, right? Because I think, remember, go back to one of your kind of litmus tests is, can you measure your equity statement? And you can measure this, even though it's hard to measure bias, right? It's hard to measure people's mindsets, but you can measure this through when you do professional learning for your staff, right? Following up in multiple ways, and also observation. So when we talk about equity walks, we talk about observing practices in a classroom. You can see the impact of professional learning on people's practices, right? So examining biases typically happen where? When you facilitate that process through usually professional learning. And then Bernie, you get a great example through those discussions, right? And how we kind of have dialogue about biases. So I don't know. You like that last bullet point? I think Bernie had a really good one to add to this. It's coming along. You see how like you all made it look so much better than when I showed it to you? It was bare. It needed some meat to it, but it's getting there. You're doing great. So anything else you're thinking about? Remember, this is not designed for you to finish tonight. So, you know, I want you to be really cognizant of we're in the beginning phases. In our next study session, we'll come back to this, massage a little bit more. And remember, we want to take our statement and place this in our policy because you're putting your statement in support of that lens for how you're going to govern. So as you look at this and you think about our statement, can I apply this as a lens to every decision we make? And can I line my questions, right, to our staff and to our superintendent when we want to really, as a governance team, ask the questions to let us know, is this happening? You know, how is it happening? And when we use the word equity, this is the lens we're referring to. So I want you to look at that. I'm going to give you another tool before we close out to help you really see how powerful your statement is. But I want you to just have one last glance at this. And again, we'll come back to it. I'll send this to you, by the way, Bernie, so you can share it with folks and have it as a document people can look at and you all can fiddle with it between now and the next session. But how do you feel about leaving this for now as a rough draft and be able to come back to it and honestly have discussion with some of your constituents, with colleagues, just kind of throwing it out there. Here's our start. Here's our conversation as a governance team. Here's where we started. And then we're going to continue this and unpack it together. How do you feel about about putting a pin in it for now and being okay with a little non-closure. And
One-
coming back
one-
to it. What do you think? Mhm.
One question I would pose would be, in that first sentence, we mentioned an available pathway to success.
Yes.
Do we
Yep.
want to make that plural? Like each student
Oh.
has
Pathways,
available
yeah,
pathways.
absolutely.
Yep,
Yep. Thank you.
I mean, it could include just one. I mean, it'd be
Right.
great if everyone had at least one, but sometimes students might have two or three, so.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think
So-
Monifo had that piece. I think you'd added in about the pathways to success, and then Maria mentioned availability. So I thought that really blended. Yeah, jump
But
in.
we can just get rid of the "and" in front of it, right?
That's basically what I was
Oh,
gonna say. Take
okay.
out the "and" in front of it. Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Sorry. Yep, got it. This is why more than one set of eyeballs happens at 9 o'clock at night, because
Yeah. And
Yes.
and even at 11 o'clock at night, my eyeball, I am
Right.
excited. I am excited about that fourth bullet.
yes.
That is because when we're talking about the mental model, buy-in, that's a strong statement right there. That's going to the core of the work. That's where it's going to be uncomfortable for everyone, for staffing. But you're spot on right there. I really like that bullet point.
Yep. Andrea, did you have a thought? Okay. So the only question I think before we move past this is I feel like you all didn't wrestle with bullet point number 2. I think we were just avoiding this one. How do we figure this? Because you're calling it out, but I know you talked about maybe we're saying bullet number 2 is kind of like bullet 3. And we might be redundant. So does anyone have any last thoughts about where we may want to stick these words or kind of mesh them into bullet 3?
I almost see it not just taking it out and leaving the other one underneath.
Okay,
Because
so
it
we
says
called
it.
out what students are doing best. Yep. And then
Yeah.
level playing field is kind of like the pathways, the access.
Yeah,
All right, let's try this. Let's see how that looks.
I don't like the playing field.
That's pretty short and sweet, huh?
Yeah, I think it just encompasses many things.
Yep, got it. Okay. All right. So here's what I want to do for you all, because you all should be getting nice and tired. And so I want to give you some closing connections, right, to this work and where we're going, because I think this is important for you to see where is this going. And so as you look at your draft, again, the word draft is very critical. That means this is not exactly what we say equity is, but this is kind of where we're starting our discussion, and we're going to massage this. And again, we want to go back to, can I measure this? Are we calling out, what explicitly we're talking about? Is it student-centered? Can we communicate this? And is this something where, again, we see like openness for feedback from our community members? Because some of these words have to be meaningful, right, for people. It can't just be us, right? It can't be that we're like, here's what equity means, and then the kids are like, that's not what that means to me, right? So we don't want to have any disconnects. But I think you all are on a great path, and I'm agree with Deborah, really excited about not only your additional last bullet, but just overall, I think you captured really the essence of what you feel equity is based on our original discussion, right, that we had, and that was just the beginning of that conversation. So one of the things I want to do is I want you to think about this statement as it's the lens by which you govern. Okay. It's the lens by which you govern. And remember when we talked about effective governance practices and why it's so important that we just have the basic effective practices. And I'm going to go back to one of Deborah's reminders of why this is so important. And you all had mentioned this earlier about why it's important to have a statement is to be on the same page, right? So Deborah, you always show this particular image, which is always important for governance teams to recognize as you do equity work and you kind of define what equity is. You got to remember, where does all this sit now in our governance, right? What is our role in this? And so remember, this was a great reminder of like where the superintendent role is, where the board's role is. And remember, as a board, you all set the vision, you set the goals, you set the policy. So some of the work we're doing right now sits right above that dotted line. That's what you all just worked on. We're setting a vision through our equity statement about what this work is about. Your policy is what we're going to massage in our next session. And so as you already have started your work, your policy is centered around the CSBA sample that they've used, and it's great starting point. What we want to do is massage that with your equity statement to really create a clear vision for where this work is going to go. What is the direction we want from our superintendent and our staff, right, to make this work happen, which goes underneath the blue line, right? And where now implementation happens at the superintendent and superintendent designee levels. So this is where, as a governance team, we understand this is what equity is, but we don't do the work. Right, I'll say it one more time. We don't do the work, right? So this is where we don't go, but what we call into the weeds, which is why I pushed you all. And y'all did good tonight, by the way. Some boards I work with want to go deep into the weeds and talk about what it's going to look like and all that. It's like, wait a minute, that's not our role. That's for the superintendent, right? To take your vision and now actualize it in actions and then share that back with you. Here's how this looks. Here's how we're doing this work. And that's the role of the superintendent. And so as you all are working together and continuously using your norms to create your culture for how you work together, that's where that dotted blue line is so important, that you all will come like below that line, above that line in your communication. But the great news is your communication is centered around one common language. That's very important for governance teams to recognize. And so even though we're continuously going to massage your equity statement, your roles in this work is going to be critical to remember that this work is driven by a lot of passion, a lot of emotion. And remember, until everybody in your entire school community has an understanding of your equity statement, this work is going to still be messy, because some are not going to agree with your statement. Some are not going to understand your statement because they haven't had that lived experience, right? They may not have context. This is very new to them. So understanding our role in terms of how we sit in our governance space is really important to remember. But I'm going to give you a little bit more of a context about why this is important. So in your work, one of the things going to happen as you were looking at your equity statement, I asked you, how would you measure that, right? What is that going to look like? Like, how do you envision this happening? There's a lot of work that goes into your 3 bullet points you called out. There's a lot of work. And so often when we talk about for governance teams is to recognize that as you start to begin to do your equity work and take your equity lens, now we have to talk about prioritizing the work. That you'll find that you can't do all things equity. There's going to be a lot of things that can be applied with your equity statement in your lens. But what we often talk about is effective governance teams prioritize their work. And so as you prioritize your work, you're going to find that you're not going to be able to get into the weeds with everything because you'll never get anything done. And as you look at effective governance teams, they don't get caught in a lot of the operational kind of weeds of the work. That's the role of the superintendent. But for the board, your role is to really prioritize. So as you look at the example you see on the screen, you see 4 different spaces where we ask governance teams to think about what are the most critical things that you are going to be responsible for that rise to your kind of governance space, okay, that specifically around equity, but specifically around what effective governance teams do. We focus on these 4 things because these are the top priorities in our district. And anything that's not really part of these priorities, we probably shouldn't be spending a lot of time on, right? And so safety is absolutely a priority. Would you all agree? Mm-hmm. School safety is important, right? Absolutely. What's our climate of our campus? There's a lot that goes into that. I gave you a couple of bullet points that are examples, right? This is where discipline comes up. Discipline definitely comes to the board's attention because you have discipline policies, right? Okay. Looking at teaching and learning, right? Teaching and learning is a priority. Would you say, like what's happening in the classroom, right? We're in the business of educating kids. Absolutely teaching and learning, because you have lots of policies around academic achievement and around how kids are successful in your school district. And so I gave you a couple of bullet points there to think about what are some things that really come to the forefront. You all mentioned ethnic studies, which I appreciate, right? That curriculum adoption, right? That's where the board sat. And so those are things that should rise to your particular priority space. Human resources, probably a big deal, right? Would you say 85-90% of your budget goes to people? So it should be a priority. Do you have board policy that governs personnel? Yes, you do. And that's absolutely a critical priority. So recruitment, retention, hiring, you set the framework for that. You don't hire, right? Your job is hire superintendent. That's your one employee, but you do set the framework and the expectation around hiring practices And then of course, you then approve those that are hired into the district because they're associated with your other priority, which is off to next to HR, human resources and in your staffing is your budget, right? So as you look at these 4 priorities, your budget is very much, a common sense one. We don't spend a lot of time talking about it because you know that you have to be a fiscally sound board. Like your responsibility is to make sure that your district is fiscally sound and that you're sustaining resources and that your district has obviously your reserve and everything that's associated with the budget, right? That's a big deal and it should rise to your priority space. Now, why am I bringing this up? A couple of things, and when we talk about equity, that as you do this work, you're going to find that a lot of things are connected to equity, right? Because it's about everything we do. We want to use that as a lens for everything. But what may happen is some people in your community are going to come to you as a governance team in the name of equity and demand that you address some of the needs that they bring to you. And as a governance team, you're going to have to wrestle with these because everything is not a priority. And my funny example, and Deborah, we got to come up with a new one. You got to give me a new one, but I've been using this a lot because I think it's a very real example, is you will have someone who will come to you and may say, and I may have shared this with you, it may say like their priority and their equity issue is that you have one school whose facilities have these beautiful palm trees in front of them. And there's 5 of them. And there is a problem because this is not equitable because at that school on the other side of town, you got 10 palm trees planted in front of them. And that is not equitable. And Trustee Koo, I expect you're going to address this and it better be an agenda item that we're going to talk about and have a whole study session about. And you're going to say, thank you, but this is not a priority, right? And yes, that is an equity issue. Let's unpack it. And then you're going to come up with your equity statement and say, well, for us, equity means this. And are palm trees and facilities important for our kids' learning? Does it impact kids? Maybe, but is that directly correlating to learning and student achievement? Probably not. So it's not a priority. And then you'll gladly say, let me direct you back to our wonderful superintendent who can address your needs, because that is way in the weeds and that is not something that a board member should really be spending a lot of time on, right? So that's why priorities are important, because with equity work, people are going to prioritize it in their mind what equity is to them. And yes, we want to listen to our constituents and our community, but we do have to prioritize our work, or else you will have 1,000 initiatives. You will be up all night in board meetings till 2 a.m. because your agendas are full of all kinds of equity related things. So when we talk about your agenda building process, using a priority structure like this is really helpful too, so that your agendas and your business is really focused on what is most critical when we talk about the work we're doing as a team. The other place that's so critical for this is how you ask questions to your superintendent and the staff. So the staff is starting to get used to our board's priorities are these. So when they present to you knowing your priorities. They present to you knowing your equity lens. So then we have a culture around how we collaborate with our staff and our superintendent, and we're not just having random questions about things that don't actually apply to our priorities. This is where we talk about operational, getting in the weeds. Board members who are effective, governance teams, I should say, who are effective, don't get in the weeds and spend a lot of time on operational things. Because if that's not impacting what you said you want to do, then it's really not, again, effective. It's not a good use of time. And so I'll use a great example here is some of the questions you may ask. So this is a great kind of connection. We have our equity lens. We have our priorities for our work. Now our staff, Bernie comes to you, staff comes to you, and they're sharing a presentation about, I don't know, school discipline or student achievement, or, oh, I got one. We want to bring a consultant forward and do a contract for professional learning, right? I get to do that all the time. And what questions do you ask to your staff to ensure that you are, one, allocating your money responsibly, because that's a priority, and two, that this has an equity, it's impacting our work through an equity lens. So look at some of the questions that you can ask. A real quick, clear question is, and this is something that the staff will just get used to. So when they present to you, they'll already come with, hey, Bullet point 2, how does this practice align with our equity statement and policy? Very easy question. But we have to create our statement first, right? And we have to have our policy well known so that then we know that our practices are aligning with what the board vision is around equity. So I'm going to pause for a second and see what's resonating with you about your statement and kind of aligning it now with prioritizing the work. So we don't get too deep in the weeds, but we actually kind of see where this really kind of folds into our governance. So what questions or thoughts do you have in our kind of closing time together? And I'll go back to this and I can go back to the questions if you need to. So anybody jump in. What's coming up for you? You got it. You're on the home stretch. You're on the home stretch. Tell me what's coming up for you. Prioritizing the work. Is that resonating with you? Or maybe you have questions about it. Would you say these are priorities you have as a board? What are you thinking? What are you thinking?
I think the prioritizing part, looking at this again, for me is a good reflection for us to really look at this and compare it to what we have prioritized. And that's speaking to a level of alignment. I mean, I'm looking at this now and I'm like, how much of this in here is stuff that we actually have identified as our priorities? So I do recognize that we probably would need to revisit that are to be our priorities to ensure that it's aligned with the equity statement that we're drafting, because we have to put that into practice and we need to know what we're prioritizing to be able to facilitate that conversation with regards to all of the components that need to be involved. And then looking at the implementation, of course, requires a level of process that we need to visit as well.
Absolutely. Got it. Thank you, Manifo. That's helpful.
Thank you.
I would say, oops.
I don't know what I said, so if you ask us next session, I won't know how to answer.
That's why we record these.
So I was going to say that so professional development, I think, has come up a lot tonight. And for me, I think that, obviously professional development will always be a priority, but I think especially with our equity statement, I think there's going to be so much change that's going to have to happen, not only for our students, but I think obviously for our administration, for our staff, for our teachers. And I feel like that is it's a very high priority, because without them buying in and without their engagement, it's going to be hard to truly implement what we're asking to implement right now.
Nice.
So
Yep. Great connection. Great connection. Yeah. Love it. Kind of reminds you of when Deborah talked about the connection with the water system change and that mental models conversation, right? And PD is definitely a big piece of addressing the mental models, especially around your statement, right? It's like, how do we educate our staff and help them understand what it is? So, because you don't want to hold people accountable without giving them the support and awareness first. So I agree, Andrea, it's definitely a big component. Thank you. Now, any other thoughts about priorities and connections to your statement?
I don't know if this is a connection specifically to our statement, but something to maybe add into this chart. Because I've been talking about equity for the longest, for decades now. And every time it's always been like, well, we need to, recognize, we need to acknowledge, which is great. And I think is, the first priority, and at the same time, we also should be celebrating right? Celebrating our cultural relevance of our students. We do actually have things like that. Our at least Ben that I've seen has a cultural night where, and this is pre-COVID, of course, but students bring dishes from their culture, and they all get grouped up, and everybody has a different table, and we all get to sample each other's foods from each other's culture, which I think food to me, and I might just be a fatso, but I think is a great way to connect people and celebrate our cultural not differences, but our just our culture, and not just recognizing it, but celebrating each other's culture. So I think maybe something like that in here, along with the cultural relevance.
Got it.
It's just, so it's not just like a surviving. It's more. It's
Yeah.
like thriving, right?
Absolutely.
Kind of.
No, I hear you. Yeah, and maybe honestly, I wrestle with this slide all the time because I think when I first developed it, I think we had how many bullet points? Deborah was like, well, they're not going to fit on the slide anymore. So it's really more of a reflection of like some of the main pieces. But I love that feedback, and I'll actually maybe add that around that school climate piece around not only that family engagement and outreach, but I feel like that celebration is a big deal. It's big. It's around really acknowledging culture, right? And that's a big part of this work. So I think the hard part with this is when you look at this from a governance lens, right? That's going down into the weeds. But what it does do is it's questions you can ask as a board members. How are we celebrating student cultures, right? How are we doing that? And then how is that impacting student achievement? Because here's the one thing that always gets worried about, and it kind of goes back to the article that Deborah had you all discuss, right? Is that avoiding racial equity detours is in the name of equity, we may have those wonderful celebrations, right? But they're not adequate in terms of being able to really celebrate the true essence of kids. They may be more around stereotypes. So they actually don't authentically really celebrate. And then what happens is we actually cause more damage than good, and we don't even realize it. And then what happens, it doesn't show up necessarily in impacting student achievement or kids' own kind of cultural identity and kind of and feeling included in the school environment, which does impact achievement. So I think what you brought up is important. Those are great questions to ask.
Yeah, and also, Nicole, quickly, the celebration piece has a place in your equity policy because you must celebrate. That's that when there's about 7 different items where it says to make sure the ingredients, if you will, and as always, you have to have that celebration in there, absolutely. And so it's best to put it in your policy because that's what you're going to live by. That's what's going to guide you. And so it'll be a constant reminder that we do have to embed some celebration of this work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to go into the weeds, but I just wanted to give, the team an example of something that this can be transferable to something tangible that we have a coding class at one of our schools. And the last time I visited, it was all male. And I was the only person that brought that up. I said, hey, there's no girls in this class. And the people that were teaching it, the principal that was there, they were like, wow, we never noticed that before. And I said, well, because you guys are all boys, so you don't actually see that inequity, but I do. And something that we can do as a district, and our superintendent actually made this suggestion that we bring somebody, a female that has been successful in STEM, celebrate that person. And in that, we are allowing these girls to think, hey, you know what, she made it, I could do it. And kind of, bring the celebration to the relevance of it and allow them to see that they can be successful, just like the women that we would bring in.
Powerful. Yeah, great example. Great example. Yeah, powerful. Yeah, you all are on a roll, and here we are. That last agreement is now we have to celebrate. No, I'm sorry. We have to acknowledge and accept and expect a little non-closure right now. Maybe not celebrate it, but at least accept it. And so, in our 3 hours tonight, I think you've accomplished quite a bit. in terms of one, just having the time to process. Sometimes we don't recognize that that's needed, the discussion. You all had a lot of kind of think time to really look back and go, is that what we think equity is? And so you had a chance to look at your statement. You had a chance to reflect on some of the ways that, governance teams can perpetuate inequities if you're not really conscious of it. And so through looking at the timeline and looking at some of the detours that Dr. Gorski talked about in the article. So our next steps is really to continue this work. So I know that, Bernie, we have the next session on June 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. And then again on July 12th. Are we still the 2 dates?
Bernie?
All right, good. So we'll get to hang out in the summer, yay. And so one of the things that we'll do though is continue to evolve your equity statement. So I'll send you that via email, Bernie, so you can share with the board as well, because you all may want to look at that and like tear it up with some more on your own. Maybe you want some feedback from someone. So it's yours as a draft. We'll continue to unpack the priorities, because I think that's an important piece. And maybe between now and then you all can come back with what are your current priorities and how this may align. And then we're going to look at your CSBA adopted equity policy and actually kind of massage that a little bit so that you have a little bit more meat to it in terms of not only what the board shall do from the policy space, but also the kind of what the superintendent shall do, because that's, remember, below the blue line, that's where the actions happen. So you want to be very clear about what that is, and that's where you align it with your statement and your priority. So we'll do all of that in really the next 2 sessions, okay, because that takes quite a bit of time. And so when we're all said and done, you'll really have kind of a updated, not only statement, but also policy. And then you all can decide when you want to adopt that as a board. Okay. So with that, let's see, Maybell, I will pass the virtual mic back to you as president, and share our information again. Deborah and I are always excited to hang out with governance teams, even late night. And so please remember, in between our sessions, please reach out to us. If you have questions, you need a thought partner, we're here for you beyond the study sessions, and want to make sure it's really clear. And sometimes individually you have questions or concerns, and definitely reach out to us, because that's what we're here for on the journey. So thank you again, Bernie, for allowing us to partner with you. And as Fearless Superintendent, always appreciate the vision of our fearless leaders and all of your staff, of course, who lock arms with you. And so thank you again for allowing us to support tonight, and just really honored to support your work. Very proud of, you should be proud of your progress so far. And it's a long journey still, but you definitely are moving in a great, I would say, you made a big step tonight, just being able to really kind of get to a place of common language. You're still working at that, but it's pretty powerful. I really am honored to see. So thank you again.
Absolutely. And thank you for staying fully engaged.
Right.
Really appreciate that. It's tough. And just the rich discussion. And yes, this is being recorded, so do go back. I mean, you guys, brilliant minds. I have to commend you. And the way you dissected that equity statement, I was impressed. Because not everybody does that. We know, right, Nicole?
No, good stuff. Yeah. Good
It was good. So I commend you for that. And it's my honor to work with the team as well, and look forward to our next session.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here with us this evening. I know it's late for you, Miss Deborah, being in a different time zone, but we truly appreciate it. And I know that this is invaluable to our district, and definitely look forward to being with you again a couple more times and really flesh this out. And we appreciate your assistance with that. Does anybody else have anything to say? Superintendent, trustees. Okay, well, if nothing, then I will adjourn. Oh, yes,
Oh,
trustee Bo.
I was just saying, thank you.
Absolutely.
I just have one quick add. I just want to say, when we speak to equity, I love that President Biden has announced a NHPI month, something we've advocated for a long time. So when we talk about equity, I think that's a great example.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And I really commend this board, this district, Superintendent Vidales, for bringing this to us. It's such a timely thing with everything going on in the world and in our community as well. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And if nothing else, I will adjourn this meeting at 9:34 p.m.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good
Happy
night.
Mother's Day.
Oh, happy
Happy
Mother's
Mother's
Day.
Day.
Happy Mother's Day. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.